Teta. He's not fit at the moment, but should be back sometime soon. They feel there are more than enough weapons in that Palace team to be winning games of football, and one winning 15 is not good enough.
It feels like he's playing chicken a little bit with the hierarchy, isn't he? Because he's saying, I'm not good enough at the moment. I can't do this job. It's very hard for me, blah, blah, blah. And Palace are in a situation where they're obviously like, well, you've already said you're going to leave at the end of the season. You've got a contract to fulfill. You need to fulfill that. Yeah. We're not just going to pay you up for the sake of paying you up so you can have a 3-month holiday and prepare yourself for a new job. Quite rightly so, by the way. But at the same time, Palace are in a predicament where they've won one game in 15. They might go...
Tyson Fury, Floyd Mayweather, Canelo Alvarez. Just hearing these names makes you think money and the hundreds of millions of dollars, pounds or Saudi riyals in boxing. But that's at the top. At the bottom, it isn't quite the same. Even for those on the rise, there's not an awful lot of cash in the boxing world. And if you're just starting out, well, it can be a very costly exercise indeed. But don't take my word for it. Here's the former European champion, talkSPORT's Spencer Oliver.
You're turning professional and you're boxing, let's say, York Hall on a non-televised fight. You have to sell tickets to earn any money, but you have to cover the wages of your opponent as well. So if you don't have the ability to be able to sell enough tickets, you effectively have to pay to fight.
A far cry then from Jake Paul facing Mike Tyson in 2024, when the purse was reported to be around £48 million. But the vast amounts of cash lining the top dog's pockets isn't the norm in a typical fight.
Let's say you're lucky and you get between 5 and 10 grand. You're going to get 10 grand max for that. 10% goes to the trainer, 25% goes to the manager. Then we've got the tax man to pay as well. So we're cutting that money in at least half. So now you've got 5 grand for a 10-week camp. So you're talking about a guy here earning, he might be clearing 500 quid a week. How do you support a family on that? So boxers chase the dream. And, there's probably 2% of them that actually make it.
So say you do make it and you start to rise up the ranks. Strikers Boxing, a training academy, says the mid-tier fighters can earn more, somewhere between £10,000 and £50,000 a fight, depending on record, profile, opponent and popularity of weight class. It's only at the top level does the real cash start flowing in, with the top-tier professionals, i.e. those going for titles, earning 6 figures a fight. Something else you'll have heard of is the terms prize fighter or journeyman. A prize fighter is, as it sounds, someone who picks up fights where they can and gets a nice big check if they win. Journeymen are the fighters who take on up-and-comers, effectively used for experience in the ring. Even if they're going up against the real prospects, a young Anthony Joshua, for example, these guys will be lucky to earn more than 10 grand. So the average boxer isn't as rich as you'd think.
Yeah, good evening, everybody, and welcome once again to Trans-Europe Express after another extraordinary week of football across the continent of Europe. Champions League, Europa League, Conference League, all the leagues now in full swing, even those summer leagues like here in the Republic of Ireland, where me, Danny Kelly, is speaking to you from. I'll be joined for the next 3 hours. Of course, I'm delighted to say what the show be without him by Andy Brassell, and we've got, as I say, a monster of a show for you, really. We'll take all the major stories from across the continent, including 4 games that are still going on in big leagues in Europe. We'll have Mbappe watch after another extraordinary week in the life of Vinicius Junior, and of course his many, many enemies. We'll have a review and previews of the Champions League playoffs, plus those Europa League and Conference League playoffs as well. Tim Vickery will join us from South America, and our cult hero is somebody who you thought had retired. We rarely do a player who's still playing, but his story is so remarkable. What he's doing this season is so incredible, and we're going to have a present-day cult hero for you before the end of the show. Welcome one, welcome all, bienvenue, willkommen, Fulcher, to another edition here on talkSPORT of Trans-Europe Express. So, Andy, how are you?
I'm good, Danny. You?
Very, very good indeed. There are three big games. The game in Portugal's barely started, but three big games. Now, I'm watching the game in Spain, where it's half-time, Andy, and the score is Villarreal 2, Valencia 1. Valencia took the lead with a penalty from the beautifully named Largi Ramani, and that gave them the lead. But Villarreal have come right back. Santi Comisana got a goal for them after the half hour, and then another really late penalty, 6 minutes to added on time in the first half, by Gay made it. Villarreal 2, Valencia 1. What about the games you're watching?
Well, there's one in France which is noteworthy. Strasbourg 2, Lyon 0 at the moment. Noteworthy because Lyon have won 13 successive games in all competitions. So this would be quite a scalp for Gary O'Neill and company. They've played really, really well so far and just gone
Next Chelsea manager Gary O'Neill. Excellent.
Yeah, exactly. And a previous Chelsea player, Diego Moreira, has just scored the second with a heavily deflected shot from way out. It's still 0-0 in Rome, and coming up to the hour between Roma and Cremonese. No, it isn't. It's 1-0 to Roma. It's a corner by Zeki Celik, headed in by Brian Cristante. Surely the only way Cremonese can respond is to bring on Jamie Vardy.
Absolutely. Thank you very, very much indeed. Now, look, we talk about the issues in football surrounding racism against individual players and groups of players more than I would like. I wish it didn't exist, but it does. And so we will not be put off just because, you talk about that again. No, if we don't confront it, it will continue. If it continues, it damages us all. Time now for this.
Carrière, le Paris Saint-Germain, Mbappé! Mbappé! Little give and go, Mbappe's in! Oh, Chouchou! He scored twice in 2 minutes! Tête de Kylian Mbappé. Allez, Kylian!
As I say, Andy, I'd rather we weren't talking about racism, but while it exists, while it is being alleged, while it is being obviously practiced, then we will confront it. And so once again, the Champions League, the preeminent club tournament in European football, is marred by what is under investigation, an alleged incident of racism once again against the same player, Vinicius Jr., who of course had preceded the alleged incident with Gianluca Prestiani by scoring just one of those goals that may remind you why he's one of the three best players in the world.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. But what followed next? I mean, look, so much has been said about this in recent days. And I don't think we're going to add anything by saying racism is bad and Jose Mourinho embarrassed himself, really.
Exactly.
And even his staunchest defenders could find no defence, really, for what he said in the press conference afterwards, which is something that really is at the heart of everything that happened here, because the thing that I noticed the most and I thought was the most striking and the most depressing, really, is when the words were said, and we all know what words they were, from Gianluca Prestiani to Vinny Jr., he had it all covered because he knew how to deal with it, because he's had to deal with it so many times before in the 7 or 8 years that he's been in Spain. So really, as much as I'm sure the emotion was probably the same, that it felt terrible all over again, that in a way, Vinny Jr. is fighting the fight for other people rather than himself now, because he is so used to this. Now, the line that Mourinho brought out, as well as really sort of misusing the memory of Eusebio in quite an intellectually dishonest way. That's the part I found
disgraceful. The great man is not there to say what he thinks, and for him to be dragged into this in that way was unforgivable.
No, it was pretty awful. But the line that the line that I thought Mourinho was better than is the one that he came out and said, "Well, does he have to celebrate in that way? Look, he scored a goal. He can celebrate in any way that he wants.
Not just a goal, but a brilliant goal in the Champions League."
Yeah, and none of this matters, of course, does it?
Of course.
But no. I guess the interesting thing is that so many times before, this has been used in Spain as the excuse for the abuse that Vinny Jr. has received. And not only other managers have used it, other fans have used it, players have used it as well to say, oh, yeah, but, he winds people up. He's annoying. None of that has the remotest relevance to any of this. And the fact that that was brought out all over again it must be the 15th, 16th time that he's heard it since he's been in Europe, that, actually, maybe it's something you're doing, which is ludicrous. It's also, I think, the fact that the way that Benfica closed ranks afterwards, all it would have done really is, all it would have really taken is them saying, we don't really know what went on the pitch. We owe it to everyone to look into it. That's all they had to say.
Yeah,
but instead, not knowing that there's no way that they could know their player was innocent. Not only that with Mourinho, but all their players came out and said afterwards, "Oh, he's a good guy. He wouldn't do that.
Well,
he
wouldn't do that."
And Benfica published on their socials a quote tweet of what Prestiani said, where he denied it. He gave this mealy-mouthed denial, and they came out and said, "Oh, we're with you. We're together. We're with you. By your side." By your side,
well,
really.
This was my thing about Mourinho. He's entitled to defend the club. He's entitled to defend the player if that's what he feels is appropriate. He's not entitled to attack Vinicius as part of those defences.
No.
But I think in this case, obviously you've got the shirt over the mouth, and I'm never really for finding people guilty until they've had due process. But in this particular case, Prestiani has got a separate problem from the normal case where one person says I did, one person says I didn't, and then that becomes the battleground, because afterwards the world's most high-profile footballer, Kylian Mbappe, after whom this section is named, said that he'd actually heard it.
Yeah, that's right. And you could tell at the time from the way he reacted, he was going mad. But the interview that Mbappe gave afterwards is the sort of words that you expect from a leader. Now, I know we sometimes look at Kylian Mbappe and think, great player, but is he really captain material? Did he only end up as France's captain because he's France's best player? At this point, I think that is a really good example of why Didier Deschamps thinks he's captain material. To come out with those words, to come out and say what needed to be said, to put out there what actually happened, to say, I heard it with my own ears. He said it 4 or 5 times, and their players heard it as well. And to say, I've no problem with Benfica, that's a great club. I've got lots of Portuguese friends, but the reality is this guy shouldn't be playing in the Champions League after that. And I think that's more than fair comment. And I think that the lack of contrition from Prestiani, that everything he's said since is just to save his own backside. Bear in mind, he got booked for simulation after this and had the nerve to complain about that. Whereas anyone normal is thinking, I've done quite well to stay on the pitch here.
Yeah.
The cheek is extraordinary. It's just shameless.
Yeah. Look, as I say, we will continue to highlight this stuff because if we don't, we become complicit, and because we feel we should as well. It's the right thing to do. In a game where, there's plenty of ways to niggle your rivals, but to lower yourself to that is just not acceptable. Also, it's against the law. Let's be frank about it.
Yeah.
In most countries, at least. Prestiani, I suppose, luckily for him, was suspended this weekend, so he didn't have to go on Prestiani watch.
Yeah, that's right. Ducking out of a game that was a real minor footnote in Benfica's season, playing the worst team in the division against Aves. They won 3-0. Real Madrid had a far more challenging game away at Osasuna. Vinicius Junior scored in that game to briefly bring them back to 1-1, and then they lost to a last-minute goal by Raul Garcia, so are no longer top of the league. But you would expect them to polish off Benfica in that second game. And you know what? It's such a shame. Obviously, there are so many more important things than football to talk about around this. But, for the first half of this game, you're thinking Benfica and Real Madrid never play each other. In fact, before that game in the league stage, they hadn't played each other since 62. You know, when Benfica beat Tottenham in the semi, and then went on to beat Real Madrid in the final. And it's so sad when you think of Eusebio, when you think of Di Stefano, and then you think of Trubin, and what an incredible moment that was for all of European football. And now it's just been sullied, spoiled by this horrible little man.
Yeah. And one thing I will say, it is too easy to think that there are catch-all solutions. People want instant action, instant catch-all solutions. I think that is impossible, desirable though it is, and short-sighted. So we're not going to go down that route here. But we all know that there's, I say it for the third time, and no apologies, if we don't continue to highlight it, and that includes starting what I hope will be a great edition of Trans Europe Express with it, then we're not doing our duty either. And in fact, of course, the ripples from these incidents were kept going out and out in European football, so much so that all the great managers around the leagues were being asked about it in their pre-match press conferences. Some of them had some pretty intense things to say about it, including Vincent Kompany, and it's to Germany that we turn next here on Trans Europe Express.
Mourinho, one of the best managers of our generation, but I'll tell you what, he's lost a lot of fans. He's lost a lot of neutral fans, and I just felt his comments were disgusting. For one, Vinicius Jr., if he wants to run to the corner flag and do a dance that a lot of Brazilian players do, Cunha danced when he scored against Arsenal, didn't receive racial abuse from any player. So Vinicius Jr. is allowed to dance, and also Eusebio is one of our best ever players. This club cannot be racist. What does that mean? Because your best ever player was black. That means no one else can be racist to do with your football club. And also, no one says Benfica was a racist football club, did they? It was alleged that a player had been racist. So why is Mourinho protecting the football club when no one's said that Benfica are a racist football club? Very odd.
Well, Benfica are not a homogenous group, are they? They're made up of individuals, and Prestiani is his own individual, and he's the one who's accused of the racism. It's not like everyone's accusing the club of it. It just seems a little bit strange that now Benfica have come out in support of him, almost as...
Yeah, and it's to Germany that we next turn our gaze. And Andy, we call this King Company because following the incidents in the game between Benfica and Real Madrid, all managers, particularly those whose teams are still left in the Champions League, were asked for their opinion. And I think we'll start with Vincent Kompany, who, simplified the argument, I think, for a lot of people and nailed it. Particularly with regard to things like Jose Mourinho. I'll just read his quote here. This is Vincent Kompany. He said, and he said this without, I'm surprised, without anger or rancor. He just said this in a very logical way. And what he said was, after the game, we have the leader of an organisation, Jose Mourinho, who basically attacks the character of Vinicius Jr. by bringing in the type of celebration to discredit what Vinicius is doing in this moment. So I can be a bit clear about that. I'm saying, for me, in terms of leadership, it's a huge mistake, and it's something that we should not accept. And he was speaking in English here as well. Do you know what the black players had to go through in the 1960s? Was he, Mourinho, there to travel with Eusebio to every away game? Probably at the time, the only option they had was to be quiet, to say nothing, to be above it, and to be 10 times better in order to get a little bit of credit for people to say, actually, he is good. That was Eusebio's life. Now, I don't know how accurately that reflects the life of a player who was, of course, known as the Black Pearl. I'd just say a brilliant, but those of, I may have got his nickname wrong there. But just to emphasise what Mourinho was going on about, in the 1960s, along with Pelé, the black player who emerged and everyone thought, wow, what a superstar, was Eusebio, who played for Portugal and for Benfica. I'm just about old enough to remember the influence he had on the 1966 World Cup, which England won, but Eusebio was the best player in that World Cup. And for Vincent Kompany to speak so forcibly, so lucidly, and as I say, without apparent rancour, he kept his temper very well and spoke in English brilliantly, of course. That almost overshadowed, Andy, as it might, the fact that Bayern won yet again, because, as you say, at times the football becomes secondary to what's going on in the real, if you like, world.
Yeah, I think so. And so Bayern beat Eintracht Frankfurt 3-2. But Christian Streich, the former coach of Freiburg, who until he left a year and a half ago was the longest serving coach in the Bundesliga, he was talking afterwards. He was part of the panel that was speaking to Vincent Kompany after the game. And he just said, look, I'm absolutely in awe of what you said. And Max Eberl, his sporting director as well, said, look, I've known Vinny for a year and a half now, and he continues to amaze me. He's a great person. And I can't add anything to what he said. He said it perfectly, and we should just attempt to live by it.
Yeah, I mean, so Vinny Kompany, Vinny defends Vinny, if you like. He grows in stature both as a coach and as a person with each passing month, and how lucky Bayern Munich are to have him.
You know what, Danny? I don't think you can separate the two, because I think you look at how successful he's been at Bayern. And tactically, of course, he's brave, and, you know, it works in a top division and in the context of top-level football better than it did at Burnley because he's got better players. But I do think as well, if you look at the drama that tends to surround Bayern with, you know, so many ex-players with an opinion, often many of them upstairs in the boardroom. And as we've said before, he just takes the drama out of all of it. And he took the drama out of this situation. As you said, he wasn't raising his voice or getting angry or feeling the need to be sarcastic or rude about anyone else. He just explained it all perfectly. And that's why he wins so many hearts and minds inside and outside the dressing room.
Absolutely. One thing he may have less to worry about, Andy, than he might have done a couple of weeks ago, is the upcoming Klassiker against Borussia Dortmund, because what we were trailing here as a title decider looks increasingly likely to be no such thing.
Yeah, I mean, we were doing our best, weren't we? And it was 6 points going into this weekend. Bear in mind the last two weekends, because Dortmund played first, the gap had been closed to 3 points overnight on each of those occasions. And we all wanted it to be 6 points or no more than 6 points for this big game next weekend. But it's now 8 points because Dortmund drew 2-2 at Leipzig in the big game on Saturday night. But you know what? Dortmund were actually pretty pleased with themselves, because if they were 2-0 down, they were second best for a lot of it. They managed to get an equaliser by Fabio Silva in the end, a beautifully constructed, by the way, crossed by Karim Adeyemi and put away by Fabio Silva for his first Bundesliga goal, scored for Dortmund, but just not in the Bundesliga yet. And he's been really useful for them. And it just felt as well, they had another chance even to win it. Julian Brandt had a shot saved right at the end. But you just think about it and you think, well, you've got to be honest about where they are at the moment. And even though they only drew this game, they felt like they came away with something of real value. So even though the gap is 8 points, I know you think that actually plays to their advantage in the Klassiker, don't you, Dave?
I do, because whenever they're close to Dortmund, they blow up and lose 5-1. close to Bayern. They blow up and lose 5-1. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a couple of goals to bring you up to date on, by the way. Roma 2, Cremonese 0. Another Roma goal from a set piece, put in at the near post, close range finish by Evan Ndika, one of their outstanding players of the season. And it's now Strasbourg 2, Lyon 1. 15 minutes ago in both of these games. Roman Yaremchuk, the Ukrainian striker, came on. Pretty much his first contribution was to set up a goal for Corentin Tolisso. Quite a bad-tempered game, but back in the balance.
It remains 2-1 in Villarreal, Andy. But I should have made the point. This is a very important game at both ends of the table. As it stands, Villarreal are cementing slightly their third place ahead of Atletico Madrid, while Valencia definitely need the points to pull away from the relegation zone. But it remains 2-1 there. We're only an hour into that game there in Spain. Talking about the Champions League and Dortmund qualifying and maybe Bayern's progress in that, and we'll preview and review some of the Champions League games that happened during the week in about an hour's time. The chances of Bayer Leverkusen making it, Andy, are starting to become, well, diminished, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been worse for them tonight because, as we'll discuss or we'll touch on in a while, there's a thrilling draw in the late game tonight between Heidenheim and Stuttgart. Heidenheim still bottom, but a 3-3 draw. And Stuttgart could have really pulled away in fourth place had they won that. And, of course, we expected them to. But Leverkusen were already behind the 8 ball in sixth place. They're only 4 points behind fourth place when there could be 6, as we said, after losing 1-0 at Union Berlin yesterday. And it was a bad return to his former club for Robert Andrich. Now, he played his old club Union 8 times since he'd left, won 6 and drawn 2, and then came a cropper this time. In fact, it was his really bad mistake, letting a ball bounce and then letting Rani Khedira, the younger brother of Sami, go past him, the Union captain, and lob a finish in. So Union got themselves in front. And Union down the years, they're really, really hard to break once they get themselves in front. Great opportunity to equalise right at the end for Patrick Schick. But, you know, the thing with Leverkusen, this team does not create a lot of chances a lot of the time. So that has been a consistent problem for them. And, of course, they're in a huge, huge programme of games at the moment. Their coach, Kasper Hjulman, was saying afterwards, they're in the middle of I think it's 11 games in 30 days. I mean, that is a lot by any standards. And they've got a game in hand to catch up on as well.
All sorts of things, yeah,
exactly. And go into the semi-finals in the DFB Pokal as well.
And how quickly the world of football moves. Sami Khedira was a major player with the biggest clubs in the world for 10 years, and already he's slightly drifted away from my memory. So good to hear that his younger brother Rani is reminding me of Sami Khedira's golden days, perhaps a decade or so ago, or a decade and a little less ago, if I'm being absolutely honest. Now, my star of the week was playing in the Northern Derby in Germany between Werder Bremen and St. Pauli, two teams threatened with relegation. But Joel Fujita, who is a Japanese footballer, came from Belgian football. He scored the winning goal as St. Pauli. What, Danny? Try and speak English. As St. Pauli leapfrogged Werder, who have not now won in 13 games, and find themselves second from bottom. So an important goal for Joel Fujita, and he's my star of the week. Who is yours, Andy?
Well, my star of the week is Aaron Dinkji, who used to play for Werder Bremen, actually. Now, it didn't really work out for him at Freiburg. He's back on loan at Heidenheim, where he made his name in the top flight in the first place. Got his first goal since arriving back there on loan. A brilliant equaliser to get them back at 1-1 with Stuttgart. Ended up 3-3 in the end, so I didn't quite get them over the line. And they are genuinely stranded at the bottom. 5 points adrift at the bottom in what is an increasingly tight relegation battle. They look like they're going to be in Bundesliga 5 next season. But I reckon Dinkji will end up staying in the top division.
And a little hint for you that we have a lovely feature coming up towards the end of tonight's programme, certainly in the third hour, in which Bundesliga 2 will definitely be featuring. I'll say no more than that as you listen to one top feature after another here on Trans Europe Express on talkSPORT.
There were reports that the night that Sean Dyche was sacked after that Wolves game, 4 or 5 senior players were called into Marinakis' boardroom, and they essentially said, "We're not loving this." And I don't like that. That feels unfair to someone like Sean Dyche. However, last night I think was great evidence because the players played with the reins off. They played with freedom, and I think it shows that how maybe unhappy some of those players were under Sean Dyche. The fact that they went to Istanbul, to a team unbeaten domestically under Dominic Tedesco, and absolutely played them off the park.
Yeah, on paper, Max, you look at your team. I mean,
I know, yeah.
Hudson-Odoi on the wide, on his
White.
day, he can do it. Hutchinson, you've got Gibbs-White, as you mentioned there. You've got Elliot Anderson in midfield as well. So you've got some top players.
I think he's the key, Elliot Anderson, because he's the dynamo, he's the driving force. And if he can win and keep them playing and get the balls to the danger men, then Forest have every chance.
Without a doubt. Look, and we all know that Elliot Anderson's destined for the top 4 team. He's got the talent to be absolutely world class. The way that he moves, there are shades of Zidane about him. And I know that people will laugh at that, but he is something special. And I think if he...
Yeah, tomorrow morning between 6 a.m, Ali McCoist will have 9-time major trophy winner and Arsenal invincible Ray Parlour alongside him on talkSPORT Breakfast to react to today's North London derby and the rest of the weekend's football. The guys will be joined by several top guests to the show, including former England rugby head coach Eddie Jones, who will give his thoughts on where England went wrong in their Six Nations destruction, annihilation, atomisation by Ireland. So make sure that you don't miss talkSPORT Breakfast tomorrow morning from 6 a.m. Yeah, I think I used up all my sporting luck for the weekend with Ireland's victory over England in the rugby, such that nothing could happen good in North London this afternoon. There's been another goal in Rome, Andy.
Yeah, Nicola Pizzilli has made it 3-0. Jamie Vardy has made it on now, but a move started by Manu Kone. Donio Marlon involved as well and finished off by Nicola Pizzilli, the Roman midfielder. So 3-0 to Roma.
Yeah. Poor old Jamie Vardy deserved rest. I had noted that he'd played virtually every minute for Cremonese. What is he, 104 years of age? And he played virtually every minute since he got there. So I was kind of pleased to see that he was on the bench today. It's not fair to ask people of that, even though he's a very fit man, of that antiquity to be playing every single second. We're going to move on now, Andy, to France, where for some reason your headline is "Welcome to the Farmers' League." I don't know what that means, but we'll start with the game between PSG and Metz. PSG, perhaps with one eye on the second leg of their Champions League qualifier with Monaco, were much changed but handy winners.
Yeah, won 3-0 in the end, and good minutes for Bradley Barcola amongst one. Desiree Doué played in midfield, which was interesting. He opened the scoring just a couple of minutes in. And even Dro Fernandez got a go. Of course, he signed from Barcelona. Hansi Flick was pretty peeved to lose him in the window, but the 18-year-old started his first match in the centre of midfield. And that, in fact, Denny, is where our title came from, because I just had to read this passage from L'Equipe, which really tickled me, actually. André Fernandez and his debut. It said 30 months in, and Luis Enrique already knows Ligue 1 too well. 3 weeks ago, when the Parisian coach was asked about how long the waiting time would be to see the new recruit André Fernandez play, conscious of the demands of our championship, he asked for a little time. So his young compatriot of 18 years old could adopt the demanding codes of our good old Farmers League. I love that. Lovely bit of French humour.
Yeah, well, so it didn't stop Paris Saint-Germain. I wish that you could say the same for Marseille, who, despite all the chaos and the changes, continue to engender nothing but humour, really, and they choked again, Andy.
Yeah, they did. And it's been a strange old week all over again, as you say. So Mehdi Benatia, the sporting director, had quit. He was brought back, given extra powers. Pablo Longoria, the president, was sort of had some of his powers taken away from him by Frank McCourt, the owner. And so Benatia really unblocked the coaching situation. He was able to bring in Habib Beye, a sort of plan that was on standby when Benatia, who was his big champion, went. But when Benatia was back in the building, Beye, the former captain, of course, of Marseille, was brought in. So he thought he can deal with the pressure. Maybe he can galvanise these guys. They went to Brest on Friday night, and they were terrible. They were really, really awful. And Brest is, it's finished here. It's the end of the earth. And when it's rainy and wet, it's probably the last place that you want to recover your form. And they just didn't really look sufficiently minded to roll their sleeves up. Now, they went down 2-0 to 2 goals by Ludovic Ajorc. Again, the sort of big striker that you wouldn't really want to see on a Friday night like that when you're under the cosh. Mason Greenwood missed a penalty. And now they're going off to Marbella because, of course, they're not involved in the Champions League from Monday to Friday this week for a mini training camp, whereas Geronimo Dui, their goalkeeper, put it, maybe we can find the answer because we've just totally lost confidence in each other.
Andy, and of course you explain these things beautifully, but just in case one or two of the listeners missed the import of what you said at the start of that answer, last week we reported that the sporting director had left the club along with the manager, and then 2 days later I noted, my eyebrows were bouncing off the top of my head, that he had been reinstated. I mean, and that the CEO, the Longoria, who runs the club, had his powers reduced. I mean, can this hold?
Well, we're going to find out. I mean, if the results don't improve quickly, I would not put another change aside. Of course, the fact is, because Longoria has been marginalised, they're probably looking at a new president in the short rather than even medium term, I think. But Benatia has really got the rest of the season to sort of put his stamp on the situation, and we'll see what happens from there.
Meanwhile, Lens, who have been doing so well, keeping up with Paris Saint-Germain and, of course, leading them in most weekends because they tended to play a little bit before Paris Saint-Germain. The other team from southern France who joined normally Marseille in being a bit flaky, Monaco, actually went to Lens and won.
Yeah, I mean, Lens were almost a little bit too comfortable. Odson Edouard scored right at the beginning. They went 2-0 up. They were looking absolutely nailed on to keep their place at the top of Liga. And then it all went to pot and Monaco came back. 3 goals scored by former Premier League players. Folarin Balogun, who's been in form recently. Of course, he was heavily involved in the game in the Champions League in the week against PSG. He got the first. Denis Zakaria, who's back to his best recently. And then a winner by Ansu Fati. Yes, Ansu Fati did play in the Premier League. He played in the Premier League for Brighton. Remember. We had to remind each other that Zakaria played for Chelsea as well.
Well, we should have guessed, but I couldn't work out which Premier League player Denis Zakaria had played for, which Premier League team. Of course it's Chelsea, because they're revolving doors. Of course it's Chelsea.
Exactly. Look, we said former Premier League players, not former Premier League legends. But anyway, Pierre Sage, the coach of Lens, was a little bit put out, but he can't be too annoyed with his players. But it meant the leadership of the league has changed over again. But, PSG are so busy on all fronts. I think there'll be a few more little twists. And with Lyon losing their run of unbeaten games tonight, they're now 3-1 down away at Strasbourg, deep into injury time. That means that, there's only 2 possible winners of Ligue, if there was any difference anyway. And if they get Dro Fernandez on the weights, well, it'll be PSG's all the way, right?
Yeah, and should make the point, Andy, because we sometimes laugh about them, that Monaco, still, nobody's going to say they're a powerhouse or anything, but it is 3 wins in the last 4 for them. They're in a better frame of form than they have been for most of the season.
Yeah, they are, and that they needed to be, because their season was going in the bin, really. And I think until they went down to 10 men, there was a lot good happening for them in that Champions League game against PSG, as we'll talk about later. But I know I often read you through the Italian table. I'm going to read you through 4th to 8th in Ligue 1 at the moment, because with Strasbourg winning, it's going to be Marseille in 4th on 40. That's 5 points off 3rd place in the automatic Champions League places. So it's Marseille on 40, Lille on 37, Rennes 37, Monaco 34, Strasbourg now back up into 8th on 34. So a lot of competition for those European places.
Absolutely. Let me tell you about my star of the week. You mentioned earlier there how Habib Beye had left Rennes to go to Marseille, to so far not much discernible change for the Southerners. But Rennes, in his absence, have done pretty well. They've won 2. They've won 2 games since he left, including this weekend's 3-0 win at Auxerre. Very impressive. And Mady Camara got 2 of those. And so he's my star of the week. Mady Camara of Rennes is my star of the week in France. Who is yours, Andy?
I'll have an ex-Aberdeen star of the week. So I'm going with Antoine Camboire. And you're going, why Antoine Camboire? This isn't cult hero already. Well, you know what? He's back in Ligue 1 because Stéphane Gilly has been thanked for his services, as we say in France, at the head of Paris FC, took them into Ligue 1. But after losing a lead at Toulouse this weekend, still struggling at the bottom, 4th from bottom at the moment, despite having spent all that money. He's off. And the French New Caledonian Sam Allardyce is in. It will be the 5th time Camboire, the former PSG coach, has taken charge of a Ligue 1 team in the middle of a season. And in the previous 4, he got 3 of them to stay up. So that's not so bad.
Okay, fantastic star of the week. Thank you very, very much indeed. Now, I'd like to advertise what we're going to talk about next. So it gives me great pleasure to tell you we're going to Spain next. But Andy watches, I think, live and on television, more football matches than anybody I know. So what a thrill that he's going to talk about a game that describes the worst he's seen in months. That's next here on Trans Europe Express.
I'll tell you why I'm not worried. Because if Arteta doesn't win anything this season, major, then it has to go. All right?
No, I disagree with that.
No, well, you would, wouldn't you? But we don't sack managers every other week.
But you can't sack a manager who gets to the latter stages of every competition. You can't. You can't.
You can when the pattern emerges.
You can sack them.
The pattern emerges. Chelsea did it.
It depends what they do.
They won things.
So, John,
okay, here's a question. Would you sack Arteta if they finish second in
well, what happens in the Champions League?
They lose in the final.
What happens in the Carabao Cup?
Lose in the final.
FA Cup?
Lose in the final.
No, mate, he's got to go. You can't.
You're gonna sack him.
You can't get to 3
finals.
You can't get to 3 finals and finish second. You can't. That to me tells that is all the evidence. No, well done. It's a little bit like what Claudio Ranieri done at Chelsea. Chelsea, he finished second that season. We beat Arsenal in the semi-final, quarter-final of the cup.
Yeah, let's talk about Spain, Andy. And our headline is Barca back at it, because during the last 6 days, we've had defeats for both Barcelona and Real Madrid as they swap the leadership of the Spanish Championship race. But again, with Madrid losing this weekend, Barcelona had a chance to go top, and they took it in fine style at home to Levante.
Yeah, they really did. And I think it was something they really needed to do. Of course, Levante are struggling at the moment, but Barcelona needed to come out of the traps after 2 damaging defeats, and damaging in different ways, really. Of course, the Copa del Rey 4-0 at Atletico, and then worse than that, really, was the one just down the road on Monday against Girona. All they had to do was win to go back on top of La Liga, but really, I sort of look at the injuries they've got at the moment. Look at the fact that it's quite a small squad. And if there was a game and a moment that they were going to slip up in that game, it felt like it was going to be there. They could do with a Pedri being back, because of course he's Pedri, but they could have done with having a Gavi in midfield as well. Missing both of those two away at a Girona team who are much better now than they were at the start of the season. And Rafinha wasn't totally fit. He wasn't really at it. He was a bit fitter today, it felt like. And they started really well, and it went on from there. Brilliant goal by Fermin Lopez when he came on as substitute to shore it up. Marcus Rashford was on the bench as well. So it feels as if everyone was a bit sharper. But I don't know if it was just about fitness and maybe about the way that Hansi Flick spoke to them. And he said in his pre-match press conference, look, I've challenged my players. I've said to them, and there were plenty of people saying that the refereeing was poor at Atletico and it was poor away at Girona. And he said, I can get on board with that, but that's not the reason why we lost in both of those cases. We need to be better. We need to show more leadership on the pitch, and I'm expecting them to step up. And they responded in that way, which obviously with Real Madrid losing at Osasuna on the Saturday gave them the opportunity to go back on top of the table, which they took.
Okay, now I've got to be very carefully how I tread next, Andy, because despite everything, there is a very real chance that Spurs could meet Atletico Madrid in the Champions League very soon. So if I describe Atleti's form this season so far as patchy, I hope people won't take umbrage and put it up on the dressing room wall. Yes, that's how important a broadcaster I am. Simeone might easily put my comments up on the dressing room door. But again, against Espanyol, a home game against Espanyol, they managed to go a goal down, though this time they did claw it back.
I really hope we get to a point where Diego Simeone's sitting there scratching his head in a press conference going, no me gusta el Danny Kelly. I would love to see that. Yeah. But in the meantime, yes, them getting back on the horse at home to Espanyol was important. Of course, when they go a goal down after 5 minutes against Espanyol, who have had a brilliant first half of the season but have been horribly out of nick recently, you think, okay, here we go. Now, we know they've got an eye on the Champions League game in the week. We know it was exacting in the game in Bruges that they played. But I think there was a bit of once bitten, twice shy, really, because with that game against Club Brugge in mind, the first leg against Club Brugge in mind, they made a load of changes against Rayo Vallecano, basically, I think, thinking it was going to be easy. And then even with 5 subs, Simeone couldn't make enough subs to turn it round last week. They lost 3-0. They're absolutely dreadful. And I think he thought, well, there are a couple of players I can't do without. One of those being Giuliano, his son, who's such a tempo and culture setter, really, even at such a young age. He scored in this game. He was brilliant. They came back really well. Sorloth started, played really well. Maybe he feels he should have started him in the week in Brugge as well. And they won 4-2 in the end. So the important thing for them is to not drop out of the top four. That's the most important thing. You know, they've got no chance of winning La Liga. They're 11 points adrift from the top. It's just not happening, despite the fact that they've spent a lot on players in the last little while, as we've said, and maybe they're going to spend even more in the near future. But I think, especially with business taking care of itself in the cups, and you know they're in a good position to get to the last 16 in the Champions League, whoever they might play against, and they're in the great position at half time in the semi-finals of the Copa del Rey, with of course in the first week of March the return at Camp Nou to happen as well. But they need to just do their doggies in La Liga. That's the important thing, and this was a good way to do that.
Well, every season is made up of 1,000 little moments, isn't it? And they've just had a very good moment for them, because the team they're competing with for third place in La Liga is Villarreal. And they won't want Villarreal to win this game. Well, Valencia have just missed a golden chance, Andy. With 9 minutes to go in the game, they got 2-on-1 against the last Villarreal defender, and somehow allowed the goalkeeper to make the save. Which means that Villarreal are hanging on to their 3 points that it will take them clear of Atletico at the top of the Spanish league. But that could so easily have been 2 points dropped there. That was a real chance. One of those chances you just so often know that if it's a team who's higher up the table, they're going to take that chance. And it's if a team lacking direction, lacking confidence, lacking chutzpah, that they're probably going to miss, and they did. Andy, I can't wait for this now, because you'll forever talk to us about you've been to this great game, you've seen that great game, wasn't that a brilliant game, wasn't that an advertisement for football? Weren't Wimbledon great, you sometimes say. But so I was delighted when in the build-up to today's show, you told me that you had taken 2 hours out of your precious life to watch what turned out to be the worst game you've seen in months. Tell us about that.
Getafe against Sevilla. It was just atrocious in every way. So, look, we know Getafe are not exactly Brazil 1970. That is them. That is Jose Bordalas, and it's really worked for them. But after Gene, one of their key players, was sent off in the 26th minute for a really awful challenge, you thought, okay, Sevilla have got themselves a foothold here. But of course, if you're going to get a foothold in the game, you have to really be competent enough to take it. They certainly weren't for the rest of the first half, in which literally nothing happened. Like without Gene, there wouldn't even have been a half-time highlights. I don't know if you can call a high challenge with studs up a highlight, but there wouldn't have been any half-time highlights to happen. In the end, Gibril So finished a nice move, one of the few of the game, to get them the win. And of course, they celebrated a lot at the end. A, because Sevilla fans love an away day, and B, because getting this win was really, really important, and taking this opportunity. Now, they're 5 points clear of the bottom three, but that might not seem like a lot. There is so much trash beneath them that in a season, after a number of seasons where they've been in an economic mess, they can actually see, I think, the possibility that they're going to get safe. It's not going to take 40 points in Spain this year.
Is it okay, Andy, for me to say that they've improved? And maybe I should keep my mouth shut on this particular day. They've really improved since Spurs cult figure Eric Lamela went there as assistant coach. They've begun to pick up a few points.
Well, you know what? They really need him, because Matas Almeida, the Argentinian head coach, got sent off last week. But such were his words to the referee that he's been suspended for 7 games.
Oh, so Eric will be in the technical area for the next 7 games. Wow.
Yeah, get some spare tracksuits pressed. That's what we're saying.
Worth saying as well, Andy, though, this shows, if anything, illustrates the topsy-turvy nature of really top-level football and how quickly things can fall away from you. It's not the events at the North London Derby, but the fact that, Getafe and particularly Sevilla, you watch them playing out a terrible scrabble for a few grimy points at the bottom of the Spanish league. They were both representing Spain with distinction in European competitions just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it comes at you fast, life, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. More about that later, I think. It really, really does. Who's your star of the week in Spain, Andy?
Well, look, there were a few moments in it, even though it was pretty irredeemably terrible. My star of the week is going to be Odysseas Vlachodimos, because he made a brilliant one-handed save near the end. And if Sevilla had managed to throw away this win against 10 men, that would have been a real mess. But he made a great save right near the end from Martin Satriano, on loan from Lyon, of course.
And congratulations for not describing it using that goalkeeper's name as Vlachodimos, as so many people do, which caused people to remember the old reggae duo of Vlachodimos and Pliers.
I understand why they do it, and I respect it, to be honest.
Thank you very much indeed, Andy. Now, mine is the equally wonderfully named, my hero, or star of the week in Spain, is Issy Plazon. Now, look, he doesn't get much publicity because Spain is awash with beautiful midfield players, but he really is one of the better midfielders in La Liga. A little fella, about 5'8", bold as you like on the ball, and he scored the equaliser for Rayo Vallecano at Betis in a 1-1 draw. Now, following that fantastic home win over Atletico Madrid that we just talked about, Rayo now find themselves out of the relegation zone off the back of those two really good results. They're out of the bottom three, and they will be really hoping that Valencia will stay behind in this game, which is into the last 3 or 4 minutes of normal time now at Villarreal, because it's improving their chances, that's Rayo, of avoiding relegation all the time. Listen, thank you for that, Andy. Let me just tell you about our poll. I forgot to mention at the top of the show. It is on X/Twitter. And our poll is, this is a naughty one for all of you, many of you, of course, are listening in Britain. Which English club is most likely to win the Champions League this season? That's the poll. You can vote for Manchester City, or Liverpool, or Arsenal, or other. So get in touch with the poll. It's at talkSPORT on Twitter. It's at Danny Kelly Words on Twitter. And it's at Andy Brassell, 2 S's and 2 L's on Twitter. Which English club is most likely to win the Champions League this season? Manchester City, Liverpool, Arsenal, or other? Can the supporters of other, and there are 3 clubs involved there, get themselves ahead of, I suppose, Arsenal and Manchester City, who'll be leading that poll over there on Twitter? Go and vote now. It's only a bit of fun. But that is quite a provocative way of putting the question. We've got a ton of stuff to get through in the second and third hour here on Trans Europe Express with me, Danny Kelly, and him, of course, Andy Brassell. All we can ask you, stay with us. We promise it'll be entertaining. We hope it'll be fun too.
Just unbelievable how things have changed so dramatically just from like a 190-minute game where Arsenal really...
but it's not 190-minute game, though.
No, it's not.
It's been a few weeks now.
No, you're right. But if Arsenal win that 2-0 compared to drawing it 2-2, the narrative is so different. The point, it's so... We're talking about now, you said it last night, championship rounds. We are there. We're approaching that time now. Mm-hmm. And here's the funny thing, right, is that it's... Man City, right? They're not putting Arsenal under pressure. This is not like Man City and Liverpool going toe to toe, where City win, Liverpool win, City win, Liverpool draw, City win, Liverpool win, City. And do you remember that under Klopp and Pep, right? Yeah. You know, and I remember when Chelsea were like going toe to toe with Man United. You know, there'll be that they win, and you have to go. And there's like the points difference was minute, and every result mattered. The only reason that mattered.
More green jackets have been lost at the 12th than at the Augusta City Dry Cleaners. Rory McIlroy knows this better than most. But what is Amen Corner and why is it so iconic? The famous sequence has always been there since the Masters began in 1934. It didn't get its name until '58, though, when American sports writer Herbert Warren Wind, on the left, wrote, "At the farthest reach of the Augusta National Course, down in the Amen Corner." He drew inspiration from the 1933 jazz song Shouting in That Amen Corner by the Dorsey Brothers. The reason behind its difficulty is all in the sand and the water. Tournament officials don't even bother to count the balls lost in there each year, such is the sheer number. The 11th, named White Dogwood, is a downhill 520-yard par 4 with a pond to the left of the green and a bunker to the right. Both cause a lot of trouble each year. The 12th, Golden Bell, is perhaps the most famous hole in the world, with danger everywhere. Many aim for the flag, but look, get it even slightly wrong and you're in the azaleas at the back, or the bunkers at the front, or even worse, Rays Creek. Or you can play it safe and aim for the open green on the left. You chicken. Tiger Woods once said, if you make 4 bogeys from Thursday to Sunday, you're doing well. And the highest ever score on that hole? 13. It's a par 3. Tom Weiskopf in 1980 was the sorry soul. Often the iconic Ben Hogan Bridge is the only thing players enjoy about Golden Bell. Even if you escape there unscathed, though, you met with Azalea, the dogleg par 5 13th. It tempts players to go for the green in 2, but cut over those trees on the left at your peril. Every year, it seems, Amen Corner destroys someone's dreams. Rory McIlroy dropped 3 shots through here as his round unravelled in 2011. In 2016, a year after navigating Amen Corner expertly, Jordan Spieth shot a quadruple bogey on the 12th to throw away his green jacket. I mean, it sounds like my game, to be honest. So who'll be the next to be brought to their knees, praying for mercy after Amen Corner?
Yeah, welcome back one, welcome back all to the second hour of 3 of tonight's edition of Trans-Europe Express, your weekly injection directly into your eyeball of football from all across the continent of Europe. I'm Danny Kelly. With me tonight, as always, is Andy Brassell. We've got lots to get through in this second hour, including a whole load of previews and reviews of everything happened in the Champions League last Tuesday, Wednesday, and will happen this Tuesday and Wednesday as teams scrabble, fight, scratch and claw to get through to the round of 16, where they will meet, let's be honest, mostly English teams. We'll enjoy that very, very much indeed. Welcome back. Welcome back to you all. Delighted you could be with us. It's going to be another belting hour here on Trans-Europe Express. Now, fans of Air, the French band, and their classic LP Moon Safari from 1998 will enjoy the headline we've chosen for our coverage of football in Italy this weekend, which is Sesky Boy. We almost want to hear Sexy Boy. Oh, I can't sing in the background, but Sesky Boy, and we'll get onto that in just a little while. But you could almost, Andy, have made a headline about how great things are going all of a sudden, out of nowhere, but equally predictably for Inter Milan, because since the Derby d'Italia, every single result, both their own and of those of their immediate rivals, has gone their way. And what looked like one of the closest title races in Europe is now beginning to look like Shergar going down the home straight in the derby that he won, where the commentator said the rest will need a telescope to see him. You know what, Andy? This is how memory plays. I was telling somebody the other day that the the commentary on Shergar, the famous Irish horse who won the Derby by a mile back in the day before he was kidnapped by the IRA. The commentary in my mind, and this is 30 years ago now, isn't it, was he's 5 lengths clear, he's 10 lengths clear, he's 12 lengths clear, the rest will need a telescope to see him. And I thought I kind of, over the years, refined that and made up. I played it back the other day on YouTube, and those were the exact words. So it's amazing how some things stick in it. But it's such a great piece of commentary. And he was so excited. I can't remember who the commentator was. It wasn't Peter O'Sullivan. The rest will need a telescope to see him. And the rest will need a telescope to see Inter Milan very soon, won't they?
Yeah, they will. And the way it's gone in the last week has been extraordinary. Inter were in a strong position. Now it feels they're in an almost impregnable position. So they won 2-0 at Lecce this weekend, which you would expect them to do. Goals from Di Marco and Akanji to get them on the score sheet ahead of that very challenging second Champions League game against Bodo Glimt this week that we'll talk about in a little bit. But it's not really about what Inter did. I agree with you. It's about what the other teams did or didn't do. Mainly Milan, who had 2 home games against Como and Parma, and have ended up with a joint total of 1 point from those 2 games. Now, we have to say from the one today that they surprisingly lost at home to Parma, who Carlos Cuesta, the former assistant to Mikel Arteta, is doing very well there at the moment. They're one of the relegation favourites before the start of the season, and now they're pulling clear. The drama of the early part of that game was a clash of heads with involving Ruben Loftus-Cheek, after which he was stretchered off in a neck brace. He fractured his jaw, so he's going to be out for a while. So all the best to RLC off the back of that. But some really damaging drop points as well this week. Now, look, losing points to Como is one thing. You know, that's understandable, I think. But I guess you look at the other results, and what's really gone for them is the fact that the thing that's really gone for Inter is the fact that Napoli are still struggling with so many injuries. They're 1-0 up at half-time today. At Atalanta, they went down 2-1 in the end. Atalanta trying to get themselves more in the European picture. They're on the cusp of it. They're level on points with Como. And yes, I am going to do the table read again in a minute, because it is close below Inter, even though Inter are up and away, whether you want them to be Shergar, Usain Bolt or whoever else. But the notable thing in Milan versus Como on Wednesday night, which might have slipped under the radar for some, with, of course, the Champions League action going on, is that even though Rafael Leao rescued a point for Milan, the main focus was the set-to between Max Allegri and Cesc Fabregas, which the title of this section refers to. Now, really, a wonderful piece of chicanery from Cesc Fabregas. So you had Alexis Salamakers of Milan just about to get on with it and take a throw, and he was grabbed back by the shirt by Cesc Fabregas, at which point Allegri sort of blew his top to the extent that he was red carded. I don't know how many red cards he's had this season, but it's a few. I mean, I guess if you're going to succeed Sergio Conceição, you might as well do it in the style of Sergio Conceição, I suppose you could argue. But after this, he sort of exploded at Fabregas and told him that he was a little boy who looked like he'd started coaching yesterday. At which point, I suppose, Cesc sort of pulled up the collar on his cape, rubbed his hands together, left for the very short trip back to Lake Como with his points. And then Como went on to do over Juventus. Yes, another team who might have been considered, I guess, an outsider for Serie A going back a little while, especially with the way they played in the Derby d'Italia last week, which was excellent, despite the fact they played half of it, or just over half of it, with 10 men. But with Juventus having come off a pretty chastening midweek in Istanbul,
Amazing.
They lost 2-0 at home after making a raft of changes. And Como were brilliant again, and they often have been in the last little while. So fully deserved win for Como. And this is how, with the Roma win tonight, this is how it leaves things in Serie A at the moment. So we have Inter, who are 10 points clear. They've got 64. Milan second with 54. Roma with 50 now. Napoli with 50, Juventus with 46, so a little bit of a mini gap there. But that's when it really starts tightening up. Como 45, Atalanta in 7th with 45, and then there's another 10-point gap to Sassuolo. So it's really the top 7 we need to be concerned about here. But everything is opening up for Como, especially when we consider the possibility of a 5th Champions League place for Italy, perhaps.
And you're right to say, that the game but with Juventus was a tremendous result for Como. But talk to me about Juve, if you would, Andy, because a few weeks ago we were saying that Spalletti was having an instant and recognisable and positive effect on Juventus, but they've lost 3 in a row now. Yeah,
I mean, look, they want to sign him for the long term. They certainly did.
Well, he's a great coach.
Going back 6 days, yeah. And, he's respected enough that he was stopping Chiellini and Damian Comolli from physically getting after the ref at half-time during that Derby d'Italia last week at San Siro, about this time last week. Which tells you everything you need to know about Spalletti's authority. Now, incidentally, Chiellini is banned from all football activities, all non-admin activities until the end of the month. Comolli until the end of March. That's how seriously it's been taken. So say, for example, if we're talking about Weston McKennie and his contract extension, they're hoping to sign him when his contract expires. They're trying to re-sign him for next season and beyond. Officially, they can't negotiate with him at the moment because they're not allowed to do any football activities, and that includes contracts, transfers, and all that sort of stuff. Look, I'm sure someone else can take notes. I'm sure there's a way around it or whatever. But that shows you how serious it is. But Spalletti, I don't think there's any doubt, even after what's happened in the last couple of games, that he's a leader. But, if you're Juventus coach and you lose 3 in a row, there's pressure, whether that's pressure that you're putting on yourself or pressure that others are putting on you. So I don't think it's reasonable to expect Juventus to be a title challenger this season. But all of a sudden, the Juventus world has shaken on its axis just a little bit.
Yeah. And Andy, because we started not 1 but 2 editions of Trans Europe Express with this story a couple of months ago, I think it's worth just exploring the chaos that led to the game between Como and Milan being played on Wednesday, because this, of course, you may have already said it, was the game that was supposed to have been played on the far side, the
Western
other
Australia
side of the world, in Perth. And suddenly here it is, just another old fixture in the Serie A season, tucked away in midweek. But it was the source of incredible controversy, fan outrage, radio programmes like this for 2 or 3 weeks, and then such is the chaos with which the international football calendar is now organised around money, of course. That is just, no, don't worry, calm down, everybody. We'll just chuck it out in the middle of the week in February.
It's like the wildest thing that could happen in a modern football context is that, just change the date, as you might have done in the first place, because that was what was all behind it. Of course, that was the excuse used for the idea of relocating it to Perth, Western Australia, that the San Siro was unavailable because of the Winter Olympics.
The closing ceremonies tonight there, yeah.
I'm sure Mike Maignan, as much as anyone else, was glad that he could stay home and watch the curling final. But when you look at players like him, like Adrien Rabiot, experienced players coming out and saying, this is just an awful idea. Of course, that's not the reason it fell through.
No,
but they were absolutely
it didn't help,
right.
Did it?
Yeah. No.
But it was worth just noting again that that's what that game was doing there, because such a fuss had been made about it. And you're right to mention that the San Siro was needed at various times, particularly tonight for the closing ceremony of the Winter Olympics. And I'm going to say this, nobody loves the Olympic Games more than me, But man, this has gone on and on and on. I could say the same thing about the Cricket T20 World Cup. Congratulations to England for their first win in the second group, the Super 8, this morning. Very, very good indeed. But that's going on too long as well. And Andy, I'm working up to saying about 3 weeks into the upcoming World Cup in the United States, even though, as you know, I adore football, will I be saying, is this thing still going on for another fortnight? Extending these sports jamborees for the sake of television content, I don't think it does the competitions any good at all. I mean, honestly, the T20 appears to have been going on for about 3 months, and we're still got 8 teams got a chance to win it.
Honestly, players have families, journalists have families, TV workers have families.
Fans.
And you know what? There are other sports. There are always other sports.
Yeah. Let me tell you who my star of the week is in Italy after all of that. The beautifully named, and if he was a film star, you wouldn't be surprised, Brooke Norton-Cuffy. Of course, ex-Arsenal, so many of these young players are. He scored the first for Genoa in a 3-0 demolition of Torino. And with a name like Brooke Norton-Cuffy and the talent at his disposal, he is definitely destined for bigger things. Who's your star of the week, Andy?
My star of the week is going to be someone who's probably been star of the week about 27 times. I'm going to go for Domenico Berardi, still at Sassuolo, the scorer of 2 goals on Friday night to beat surely doomed Verona 3-0 for Sassuolo. Sassuolo, as we said, just below the cusp of Europe, but having a very good consolidation season under Fabio Grosso back in Serie A. And Sassuolo being back means Berardi's back, which I'm in favour of.
Okay, now, in a change to our normal way of carrying on, we sometimes rush through, and at this time of the season, these games that are on Sunday nights are often incredibly important and give Andy a chance to read the league tables, which he likes very much. But we're going to review the big games that have finished in the last few minutes. We'll also hear from our colleague Lee, who's been at a game in Italy this weekend. And Andy can tell us about, of course, in Portugal, they kick off when we're all going to bed. There's a big game involving Porto there as well. So we're looking back at the most recent league games that have just finished around the continent in the next few minutes here on Trans Europe Express.
Got to talk about Celtic. You know that the title. I don't. You've been aware, right? The title's blown open now. Celtic favourites, Rangers second favourite, Hearts third.
Yeah.
And I've been whinging, right? And maybe I shouldn't because I don't go regular now. But I've been whinging about Celtic's lack of creation in midfield. It really annoyed me. I'm looking at the midfield saying, "Come on, we're better than that." Anyway, they got absolutely gubbed last night. But what I didn't know was, right from the first whistle, the old tennis balls.
Yeah. Martin O'Neill said something about it.
All I'm saying is this, right? I'm not trying to cover up a shocking result. Celtic got pumped, absolutely pumped, 4-1. But I'm not talking about that because Stuttgart are probably a decent side, better than Celtic.
Yeah.
It doesn't do the players any good when you start that carry on.
Well, it gives the away team a lift as well.
As Martin said, Stuttgart players would know about the atmosphere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, all these tennis balls.
Now, it just so happens that this week here on talkSPORT, on Trans Europe Express here on talkSPORT, we have a chance to take a deep breath and to remember that, as we often say, there are games going on all the time. And so on a Sunday night, I always have one on the television screen in front of me. Andy tends to have two because he's more technologically advanced than me. And sometimes these games go by without being properly reported on. So tonight we thought we'd have a little change and talk about some of these games, recap the results and give Andy another chance to read league tables that he loves doing so much. So let's start then in Italy, where talkSPORT writer, of course, very much part of this show. He helps with all of the shows, sometimes on air, sometimes in the background. Lee Davey, he's been in Milan and bringing us up to date with all the latest in the race for that Scudetto.
Milan's slim chances of Serie A glory suffered a huge dent after Parma produced a smash and grab here at San Siro as Inter moved a step closer to the title. And with it went Milan's 24-game unbeaten run in Serie A, stretching back to August. Inter extended their lead at the top of the table to 10 points on Saturday with a 2-0 win at Lecce, leaving Milan with just one task: take all 3 points. Boss Max Allegri was banned from the touchline following his sending off against Como in midweek, and it didn't start well for his side, who lost Ruben Loftus-Cheek in the opening 10 minutes after a nasty collision with Parma goalkeeper Eduardo Corvi. Milan settled after a nervy opening and started to look dangerous with Christian Pulisic and Alexis Salamakis at the heart of it. The American fired inches wide shortly before the interval and was denied by a last-ditch tackle early in the second half. With time running out and Milan desperate to find an opening, Nicholas Füllkrug was introduced, and minutes later, Rafael Leao, his effort came off the inside of the post. But the game and the Serie A title race was turned on its head when Mariano Troilo netted the winner 10 minutes from time following a lengthy VAR check. So a season-defining week comes to an end with Milan taking just 1 point from 2 home games. In addition, they've scored just 3 goals in their last 4 home games, and that could end up being their undoing. Next up for Allegri's men is a trip to Cremonese before the derby at home to Inter in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, that's the way we treat you now here on Trans Europe Express. An actual match report from Lee Davey, who was in the San Siro to see what is, I think, the end of Milan's challenge to their near neighbours. Near neighbours? You can't be neighbours, you live in the same house. They're flatmates, Inter Milan. And Andy, of the games that finished tonight, the one that will have been affecting and taking the attention of AC Milan the most was the game in Rome, where Roma played Cremonese, because after a 3-0 victory for Roma, which you'll tell us about now, they are closing in. The gap between themselves and Milan is down to just 5 points, and they're now level on points with Napoli.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, it's only 4 points between Roma and Milan. So really, it's all about making sure they're comfy in the top 4 now. Gianpiero Gasperini has been speaking afterwards. He said it was a slow start to the game, but I wasn't expecting it to. Cristante broke the deadlock, of course, in the first half from a corner. Evan Ndika then afterwards making it 2-0. Third goal by Nicolo Pisili, beautifully finished after he was set up by Daniel Marlon. Marlon, of course, is fitting really well at Roma, it's fair to say. You'd expect them to beat Cremonese, but still, they had to battle to do it, as I think we touched on before, 0-0 at half-time. And afterwards, Gasperini saying he wasn't expecting his first season to go quite as well. But I think we have to be honest and say that Champions League was always the target for them. I guess what has been a little bit slower than we would have thought is the development into them playing like a real Gasperini team. They've played quite sort of circumspect football for a lot of this season, of course. The best defensive record in Serie A so far. And I guess that's not really what we expect from a Gasperini team. I think you would imagine them getting younger and playing more expressive football as time goes by. But look, this season has just got to be about qualifying for the Champions League. And they've got 2 ways of doing that now, because, of course, they can get it in the top 4 in Serie A, or they can get it in the Europa League. So we'll wait and see what happens there. But look, they're in a decent position. And after that 3-0 win, it also gives them a 4-point gap ahead of Juventus. We talked about Juventus losing against Como this weekend. What that means is they're going away to play Juventus next weekend, one of a number of big matches that we'll be able to dissect on the show. There's some enormous games happening. So you think Juventus versus Roma next weekend. We've also got Dortmund versus Bayern on the Saturday. Marseille versus Lyon is going to be on Sunday night as well. So plenty going on.
And we should make a point that there was another upshot of that result in Rome. Cremonese, who many people thought would struggle in Serie A, they've done okay so far, but that result is beginning to become part of a sequence. Jamie Vardy didn't start today, who plays for them, but at least Cremonese on 24 points, Andy. And if you consider that the team chasing them, because let's assume that Verona and Pisa are probably going to go down, is Fiorentina, who, after a dreadful start to the season, having brought in Paratici to run the club from Tottenham and brought in 5 players for the first team during the January transfer window, they've turned their form around both at home and in Europe, and they are now only 3 points behind Lecce and Cremonese, who must both be looking at the Viola in their rear view mirror and knowing that something pretty creepy is coming up behind them now.
Yeah, one for your calendar for this week, Danny. One of the 2 Serie A games tomorrow is the early ones between Fiorentina and Pisa. Now, of course, a local derby of sorts, or a regional derby of sorts.
Yeah.
Remember, Pisa, a little bit like Verona, in danger of getting cut away in that bottom 2. You would expect Fiorentina to win that, and you would expect by this time tomorrow night, Fiorentina to be out of the bottom 3. But Cremonese, of course, as you say, debuted in Serie A by winning away at Milan. That, as Lee was saying, was the last defeat that Milan had was against Cremonese right at the start when Vardy wasn't in the team. He wasn't fit enough to play at that point. In fact, I don't think he'd actually signed at that point. He'd not completed his signing. So look at where Cremonese are now. It's sort of a whole city in 2008 situation, really. You know,
it started
they've
well,
got
and
to
now
see
the realities of life there is becoming all too clear. And I'm not going to allow you to filibust what I want to talk about next. I'm going to stop you talking about this now, because if AC Milan's long run has come to an end, then so has the very impressive run of Lyon tonight.
Yeah, that's right. And if it was going to go anywhere, it was going to go at Strasbourg, because Strasbourg have been steadily improving under Gary O'Neill. Lyon have got quite a ropey record there as well. And 3-1 in the end, well deserved by Strasbourg. I thought that they were excellent. Martial Godo, the Englishman, who's gone from strength to strength in the last couple of months, he put them in front in the first half, by which point Dominic Greif had already made a couple of good saves to keep them at bay. Big deflection on the second goal, a shot from long range by Diego Moreira, former Chelsea and Lyon player, of course. He was on loan there. Deflected off Tanner Tesman, went all the way in the other corner. Roman Yaremchuk came on for the visitors, Ukrainian striker on loan from Olympiacos, set up Corentin Tolisso to pull one back, and he was very close, Yaremchuk, to getting his head on an Endrick cross, which would have been the equaliser. It would have been undeserved, and a penalty which was awarded after VAR consultation put away by Joaquin Paniquet, who, of course, is the replacement for Emmanuel Omega, who's not fit at the moment, but is going to Chelsea next season. You know what? I wouldn't completely rule out Paniquet and Omega being at Chelsea next season.
Meanwhile, I watched the game between Villarreal and Valencia, which, given the respective league positions, you might have expected, and the home advantage, you might have expected to be a very simple victory for the Yellow Submarine. Well, in the end, it was a victory, but by no means simple. It was 2-1 at half-time, and that remained the score at the end, although Valencia had 2 really gilt-edged chances, one deep into added-on time to equalise, chances that he didn't in the end take, and the final scores for Villarreal 2, Valencia 1. That means Valencia have put 3 points between themselves and Atletico Madrid in the race for 3rd and 4th place at the top of the table. Just as interesting, of course, is that Valencia now find themselves in the middle of a death scrap to avoid relegation out of La Liga. Levante and Oviedo look like they're going to struggle, but either side of the dotted line, then you've got, Andy, here we go, Mallorca 24 points, Elche 25, then a logjam of Valencia, Alaves and Rayo Vallecano, all with 26. I guess Girona and Getafe will believe that there's enough poor teams below them to make them safe, but Rayo, Alaves, Valencia, Elche and Mallorca, one of those 6 is going down, and that result for Valencia did not help their cause. Andy, have you got any news from the very, very, very late kickoffs that they do in Portugal?
Yeah, full time and bedtime at the drag out. It's just finished. Porto 1, Rio Ave 0. Winning goal by Victor Froholt in the first half. Good chances in the second half for Porto to get a second one. Rodrigo Mora hit the post in the closing minutes as well, and a few frayed tempers. There's a bit of tension as Porto struggled to get that one completely over the line. But anyway, that puts them back 4 points clear. So what we have after 23 games in Portugal is, so that's with 11 games left, we have Porto on 62, Sporting 58, Benfica 55. So Jose Mourinho and Benfica still unbeaten, but away off the pace.
Okay, the next 30 minutes here on Trans Europe Express will be spent looking at the Champions League games on Tuesday and Wednesday, reviewing what happened in the middle of last midweek, and looking forward to what's going to happen after a really extraordinary set of fixtures in these qualifiers to get yourselves into the last 16. Amazing game between Atletico and Brugge. A fantastic result for Newcastle, and at last a Turkish side justifying the amount of money they pay in wages and the amount of talent they attract to the Turkish Superliga with a phenomenal victory over one of the giants of European football. That's all coming up next in the next 25 to 30 minutes on Trans Europe Express.
Do you doubt that Jermaine can take Moses Atoma into the later rounds?
I think he's going to get knocked out. I do. I think there's no. And by the way, saying someone's going to get knocked out is not meant to be disrespectful. I'm not disrespecting Jermaine. I'm looking at the fight, looking at Moses Atoma, looking at what I've seen from Jermaine. And I think that ideally, I don't want to see an early fight. I want to see a good fight. I want to see Jermaine stick it on Moses Atoma. I want to see a good fight. And ultimately, we have an enjoyable evening watching two good fighters put something out. But I think Moses, I don't think he's been in with someone as quick and as fast and at this stage in his career. Going in with Anthony Joshua and Dillian White at their stages in their career is not the same going in with Moses. But on the other side of it, Moses isn't as experienced and as wise as those two fighters.
And that's
so there's a trade-off. But I think, personally, with due respect to the man sitting next to me, I think he's going to get knocked out by Moses.
But there's nothing to suggest that he will get knocked out because he's never been knocked down, never been knocked out.
And I'm happy to be wrong.
No, but what I'm saying
is
he's been, yeah, absolutely. But I say he had been in at the time with Anthony Joshua. Yeah, he was on a rebuild and a comeback.
Trip to Cheltenham, Alan Brazil style on talkSPORT.
Yeah, do you fancy joining talkSPORT at the famous Cheltenham Festival for the Gold Cup Day? And we're giving away the ultimate hospitality experience for two on Friday, March the 13th. Now, you'll get the full day of VIP treatment, a 4-course lunch, a complimentary bar all day, celebrity tipsters and more. You'll be experiencing the races in the best way possible, and you'll get to meet some of us. A magnificent prize, I think you'll agree. So here's how to enter. For your chance to win, text the word WIN, W-I-N, to 83338. Text costs £2.50 plus your standard network rate. Or you can phone, you can call 0343 418 7260. Lines closed on the 27th of February this year at 4 p.m. That's when you'll need to answer your phone if it rings. It's 18 plus. It's UK residents only. This is a talkSPORT promotion. The full T's and C's are at talksport.com. So for your chance to win, just text WIN to 83338. Do it now. Good luck to you all. You could be meeting Alan Brazil at Cheltenham, and there's an experience I don't think you could necessarily replicate in many other parts of the world or the sporting calendar. Andy, I think it's fair to say. We're turning our attention now to the Champions League, and after a raft of first legs on Tuesday and Wednesday last week of the qualifiers for the round of 16, just some amazing games coming up on Tuesday and Wednesday again. Plus, in the second part of this, and about 5 to 11, you're going to attempt to tell us who teams might be playing against each other. You've learned to read what do you call the layout, Andy?
The brackets.
The brackets. Thank you very much indeed. I don't know what pathway Spurs are in, but I know they're on the bracket somewhere. Let's start then with Tuesday night's fixtures, and the one that immediately catches your eye, Inter Milan running away with the Serie A, but with a significant disadvantage to overcome following their trip to the Arctic Circle against Boda.
Yeah, and I think it's a bit of a cliche to talk about there being a sort of Nordic clarity to the way that Bodo Glimt played. Firstly, before we get to Inter, we have to say about Bodo Glimt, and Lars Sivertsen would never forgive us if we did anything else. For them to have won their last 3 Champions League games against, let's do the tally, Manchester City, when they really could have done with winning, Boom. Atletico, when they really could have done with winning, away. Boom. And because that would have got them in top 8. And now, Inter, the runaway leaders of Serie A.
Boom.
Extraordinary. Like, it is absolutely amazing. I know you can say they've built a dynasty over recent years under Kjetil Knutsen. For a Norwegian team to win 3 successive Champions League games, let alone against that level of opposition, is something else. Now, if we go back, 9 months, Danny, we were speaking about Tottenham really sweeping aside Bodo Glimt in the semi-finals of the Europa League. And
yes.
Really, I think physically, tactically, technically, a not exceptional Tottenham side were absolutely miles better than them. Miles better than them. And for Knutsen to be able to go away and say, right, we're going to tweak our game, and that they played so intelligently on the counter attack, even at home. I thought, now you know you can spit out all these cliches about the teams that have beat Aspera at their place, and yes, it's very far north, it's very cold, etc., etc. This was,
all the things, yeah.
I think, a really great example of a plan that they stuck to really well and executed really well. Jens Petter Hauge, who has been a star in all of those games, and a brilliant goal that he scored as well. If he hadn't already been to Milan and Frankfurt and come back, we would be saying he's going to get a move to Serie A, the Bundesliga, wouldn't we? And
absolutely.
I think they were so smart and actually so fresh, because they're out of season, of course. They're not playing at the moment. And Inter must be looking at their schedule and thinking, oh, God, I'd love a couple of their weeks, just really training with your feet up, time to work on things tactically, time to take a breather. It's an unusual situation to be in, and that's often thought of as a disadvantage for clubs that have a summer league season. But this is this is something else entirely.
It is the most amazing story in European football in recent times.
It is.
And that's why we keep going on about it. That's why we get Lars on to talk about it. Perhaps equally amazing, Andy, if you think about the way Diego Simeone has gone about his business with Atletico Madrid over the past almost 2 decades, including 2 very near brushes with winning the Champions League. If I said to you, I see there was a 6-goal thriller in Bruges, you would not expect that would have included Atletico Madrid, but that's exactly what we got.
Yeah, the times have changed, and as Nikki Bandini pointed out to me on the continent last week, she was saying Inter might be serial contenders for the Champions League, but they won't win it this season because they can't defend well enough, which showed up to be pretty true, I think, in recent days.
Atletico
are exactly the same.
Sorry, slip of the tongue. Yeah, beg your pardon.
No, not at all. Atletico are exactly the same as Inter in that respect. They've got plenty of attacking weapons, but like when they got themselves 2-0 up at half-time, they should have been able to close this out, and they weren't. They never really looked in control of this. And funnily enough, if you're Simeone and you've got used to rotten displays on the road, often in the Champions League and sometimes domestically as well of late, you're probably going back thinking, oh, well, we beat anyone at the Metropolitano. Draw's fine, isn't it? We'll overlook the fact that we lost a 2-0 lead and we lost a 3-2 lead and we didn't really manage the game particularly well and we could have lost it at the end. Because honestly, I thought Club Brugge, if they'd have won it, it wouldn't have been unfair at all. Remember that Brugge have already given Barcelona a real going over at the Jan Bredel earlier in the campaign as well. That also ended in a 3-3 draw, though the way that panned out was a little bit different. Barcelona rarely looked like winning that, whereas Atletico could have won this, even though I don't think they would have quite deserved it. And as we said, they're so strong at home, particularly in the Champions League, give or take that game against Bodo Glimt, they'll probably get away with it. But are they a serious contender? I think no.
Which leaves us with, on Tuesday, the return legs that are perhaps a little bit uncompetitive because of 2 brilliant away performances. Leverkusen at the always difficult Olympiacos, and Newcastle overcoming the distances involved in going to Karabakh with a fabulous win. So Leverkusen and Newcastle, Andy, have what should be relatively relaxed home games for themselves on Tuesday.
Yeah, so even given Leverkusen's up and down form in 2026, they should have done the hard bit in Piraeus. And I think it's an especially good result for them, bearing in mind that they lost away at Olympiacos in the penultimate game of the league stage. So to go there so soon afterwards and give such a better performance and just capitalise on their chances so much better was a good thing. It was a good performance, and they look as if they're heading for the last 16 again. As for Newcastle, they're going to obviously end up with a pretty difficult game in the last 16 because they're facing either Chelsea or Barcelona. Now, I guess the advantage is that they will not feel they're much worse than Chelsea, which I think is fair enough. And they'll look at Barcelona and think, oh, okay, we've had a chance to size them up in the league stage as well, which is kind of helpful. So Newcastle get into the quarterfinal. Okay, they might not get back in the top 4 this season or top 5, but they could go deep into this season's Champions League. And I think after all the criticism that Eddie Howe has had for his tactics over the last couple of months, some of it justified, I thought the way that he went into this game, knowing that Karabakh would be spurred on by a noisy crowd, would go for it, and they would leave space behind. I think really going in and having Anthony Gordon at the spearhead made a lot of sense. And even though Gordon wasn't particularly convincing as a centre forward in the early part of the season or as a goal scoring threat in the early part of the season when they were sort of between Isak and Voltemade, I think it was the right team to pick, and they did really well. And, you sometimes come out of a game like this where it's been a thrashing and say, oh, it could have been 10. But it really should have been 10 or 12. Like, they were so much better than Karabakh. It was unbelievable, really. And Karabakh deserve credit for some of the results that they got in the group stages. And, you could argue that they kind of knocked off when they beat Eintracht Frankfurt, and that's why they didn't really show up at Anfield. But in this one, the gap was humongous, and Newcastle were excellent.
Yeah, and it gives Newcastle a real chance to give the squad fringe members a good run out in the Champions League in preparation for their home game against Everton at the weekend. When we come back in a few minutes' time, we'll look at the games that are happening on Wednesday, and Andy will try and give you an idea of who the English teams, not British, the English teams that remain in the tournament are liable to meet in the next round. Because it's not that difficult. It can only be one of two teams in every case, and Andy will take you through those as well. You're listening to Trans Europe Express. I'll let you know which games are you can hear on talkSPORT itself on Tuesday and Wednesday as well in the next few minutes.
They've changed the manager, which is what the fans wanted. I was at their last home game against Newcastle United, and it just felt like the players were completely on the floor, just didn't have the answers, didn't look interested or committed to the manager's plan. How will it be different under Igor Tudor, and has he had enough time to work with his players, Crook?
I'm intrigued by this appointment because obviously one of the main factors is he's proven in the past that you can come into a team in a difficult situation, give them an uplift, put wins on the board, which obviously Spurs need to steer themselves away from relegation danger. But as Southampton found with Ivan Juric last season, who had a similar profile, there's a big difference between doing that in European leagues and coming into the Premier League and doing it. I do think you're right. I think the atmosphere around the stadium will be a lot more positive on Sunday than it has been previously. I think the change of manager, the fact it's not Thomas Frank anymore as much as anything, makes this a more difficult fixture for Arsenal. But what happens if they go behind early? What happens if they lose this game? That lightning rod effect.
Yeah, the latest episode of How to Win the World Cup is now live. Matt Ford and Lloyd Griffin are joined by journalist Henry Winter as they discuss the media's role at a World Cup. That's How to Win the World Cup, our podcast that's available now on the talkSPORT app or on your favourite podcast provider. Yeah, very, very good stuff that is How to Win the World Cup. I download them regularly. And back to the Champions League. Look, I want to start first with a tie that may be all but over. For years on here, we've complained that the talent that goes to Turkey, the money that they get paid, the coaches they attract, all should mean that Turkish clubs ought to do better in all of the European competitions. And we've been waiting for a breakthrough performance in the Champions League where a team goes to Turkey. Of course, they get told, welcome to hell and all the rest of it, but actually get properly beaten. And that happened this week when Juventus, mighty Juventus, turned up at Galatasaray and got beat 5-2. How did Gala do it?
And like we said, Danny, really, they looked in a good place, Juventus, coming out of the Derby d'Italia. They played really well in that, despite losing heartbreakingly to that late goal by Piotr Zielinski, despite playing half of it with 10 men. And they got themselves into a good position at Galatasaray as well. They went a goal down, but they came back almost instantly with Koopman equalising Gabriel Sara's goal. They went in front before half-time, 2-1 up at the break. And I think that really needs emphasising within the 5-2 score, that Galatasaray scored 4 times after the break without reply. Now, I think the way that Galatasaray played it was really interesting. And you talked about Turkish teams with their money being able to attract now players in their prime, international stars in their prime, and international coaches. I think the interesting thing about Galatasaray and their recent successes, built under a Turkish coach, Okan Buruk. And of course, he's quite cosmopolitan. He speaks good English. He played for Inter when he was a player, and he's a really good player as well. But for someone really who's worked himself up coaching-wise in the Turkish game, he seized his opportunity on the stage, I thought, because it's one thing Galatasaray beating Juventus, but when they got themselves 3-2 in front with Noah Lang, of course, weighing in and getting a couple of goals, I thought what was really important is they felt Juventus on the back foot. Of course, they'd taken off Cambiaso at half-time because he was on a booking that's going to see him miss the return leg, by the way, and brought on Juan Cabal. And that backfired terribly for Spalletti. Cabal was sent off for a second booking, and for the second time in 2 games, Juventus were playing with 10, which wasn't ideal. But when they got themselves in front of Galatasaray, and when then Juventus went down to 10 men, Buruk looks at it and thinks, okay, well, we can try and finish the tie here.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy to say that in practice. And when I say in practice, like, I think, when you're training or playing a game against lesser opponents, when you're beating Juventus, which is a big name and it's a potentially huge result for your club, and as you say, even though Juventus have lost a couple of times down the years at Galatasaray, that was ages and ages ago when Wesley Sneijder scored the goal on the second day of that game that was postponed initially, that was snowed off in 2013, and Sneijder scored the winner after the pitch had been tractored, and Antonio Conte absolutely did his nut over it, which was the start of his European struggles. That was a Galatasaray with Sneijder coming out of having Drogba and players like that. This is something different, and we're talking about Turkey re-establishing itself in Europe. Now, if you look at this, to have the nerve to say, we're going to roll them over now and we're going to properly finish them, they're there for the taking. I think that's something else. And they really did that. They made attacking substitutions. They brought on Mauro Icardi to partner Victor Osimhen, as they had in the last Ligue game. And Osimhen was brilliant, by the way, despite not scoring. He's such a leader for them. He pressed the heck out of Juventus. And they brought Sacha Boey on in quite an attacking fullback position as well. And really, they were rewarded for that bravery in the 5-2, because I don't know about you, Danny, I don't see Juventus coming back from this, not just because of the current form, but even if Juventus can score against Galatasaray, there's no way they're keeping a clean sheet against them, particularly not with those defensive absences.
Too much talent coming the other way now for Galatasaray.
Agreed.
That's a really important result in the redevelopment, if you like, the re-establishment of Turkish football after a few years bottoming out, I think is fair to say. Real Madrid they have a 1-goal lead in the game against Benfica, which we started the programme with. I dare say there'll still be a great deal of hostility involved in that one.
Yes.
But again, it's not quite the given result you might think because of what happened between these clubs in the league stage.
Yeah, that's fair to say. But I guess what really made my mind up that Real Madrid were going to beat Benfica in this, going back to when we were talking about this last week, is not the fact, and it would be a fair point to say beating Real Madrid twice in a row is really hard, because of course it is.
Yes.
It was the reaction in Madrid to that game against Benfica where they lost. It's not just the inconvenience of them dropping out the top 8 and having to play 2 extra games. It's the fact there was such anger in the Real Madrid dressing room about how they'd played and about how that game rolled out and how they missed their opportunities, that it felt like there was a bit of a switch click there as well. So I always felt they were going to go to Lisbon and give a pretty coherent performance, and that's what they did. It was 1-0, could have been 2 or 3. I thought Anatoly Trubin, having scored the goal in that first game, was really, really good in goal, as he normally is in this one. So I think, especially with what's happened, Real Madrid are going to want to absolutely steamroller them, I think.
Absolutely.
And they will.
That's right. PSG won the all-French tie down in Monaco by 3-2 and will be pretty confident of going through now, Andy.
Yeah, I will be in Paris for this, hopefully going to the game as I'm working in Paris. And I think from a neutral perspective, when Monaco get themselves in front, you're thinking, okay, something's really happening here. And then Monaco start to get a bit of stage fright, I think. You think about them giving away the penalty and then the sending off as well. And in the end, with it being 2 legs and away goals not counting anymore, 3-2 wasn't that bad a result in the end. It felt as if they were hanging on to a 3-2 deficit rather than anything else, even though it needed a good save from Safanov to keep it at 3-2 towards the end of that game. I think Monaco really would have stolen the draw. But the way they got at PSG in the opening part of that, I think is a reminder that, this is not a defensive team. This is still a team, despite being the champion, that is still learning on the spot in a certain way. But I guess the thing that really changed it is when it was 2-0. You think they're 2-0 down and the reigning Ballon d'Or goes off. But the guy who replaces him, Desiree Doué, makes an instant impact. And in the end, scores 2 goals and is involved in the other one.
Well, as we've seen in the Champions League last year and the Super Cup against Spurs, they never think they're beaten, do they, PSG? No. No. That's an important thing in a young team. They never think that the other team have quite got their foot on their throat. One more tie on Wednesday sees Atalanta try at home to overcome the 2-0 defeat they suffered at Borussia Dortmund. But Andy, look, some of these ties are wide open. Others, like Galatasaray and Newcastle, who say the teams are believing they're just about through. Give us a feel for who the English teams will meet, because in every case now, the way the draw is organised on Friday, the upcoming Friday, there's only 2 sides. I think that, am I right in saying that any one of the English teams can meet?
1 or 2 opponents for everyone.
Yeah.
So the winner of PSG and Monaco will play either Barcelona or Chelsea, and Newcastle will play the other one of those, so either Chelsea or Barcelona.
Juicy ties.
Yes, we have to assume, let's just say it's Galatasaray rather than Juventus.
Yes.
We'll play Liverpool or Tottenham.
Yeah.
The one that doesn't get Galatasaray of Liverpool and Tottenham will face the winner of Atletico and Club Brugge. So let's say, for argument's sake, Atletico, which would be quite interesting against either of those sides. Of course, Liverpool and Atletico have a relatively recent Champions League beef. If Inter manage to overturn Bodo Glimt, they will play Manchester City or Sporting. The other one of those will play Real Madrid if they beat Benfica. So the possibility of Manchester City, Real Madrid there. And Arsenal or Bayern will play the winner of Atalanta or Dortmund. So let's just say, for argument's sake, Dortmund against Arsenal or Bayern. And the one that don't get the winner of Dortmund, Atalanta, will play the winner of Leverkusen, Olympiacos. So it looks like either way that Arsenal will have German opposition, probably Dortmund or Leverkusen.
Yeah, fantastic, Andy, and well done for finding a way through. It's not a maze. But it's still enough complication. But thank you very much indeed for that. And
a few chicanes.
The prospect of some magnificent ties there. And what about if in the round of 16, I don't know whether UEFA would like it very much, Real Madrid and Manchester City, nom. We're through the second hour of today's edition of Trans-Europe Express. In the final hour, we'll be joined as always by Tim Vickery. We've got a cult hero for you, but in a complete break with custom and practice. A cult hero is still playing today. We'll have a quick look at some of these important games in the Europa League and the Conference Leagues, and I will try and tell you what matches we've got for you live Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday here on talkSPORT. And then Andy will take us around the leagues as we head up towards midnight, including, and here's a sentence you don't hear every day of the week in football, Raheem Sterling's debut for Feyenoord. That's all coming up in the next hour on Trans-Europe Express.
But when you hear these comments that he's come out with now, to say he cannot get the best out of the players that have come in, if those words just come out of his mouth, then as an owner, you've got no choice now. You have to say, like, okay, he's coming out now publicly and saying he can't get the best out of top players as well, by the way. Brendan Johnson is a very good player. Okay, you can't get the best out of him.
Is he daring the board to sack him?
It sounds
100%.
It sounds like it. And by the way, I know that they missed out on Dwight McDeal. That deal didn't quite get over the line on deadline day. But there was a lot of optimism in the Palace hierarchy because of the addition of Brendan Johnson, because Jurgen Strand-Larsen has come in and obviously scored a couple of excellent goals, Gesson as well. And they kept Mateta. He's not fit at the moment, but should be back sometime soon. They feel there are more than enough weapons in that Palace team to be winning games of football, and one winning 15 is not good enough.
It feels like he's playing chicken a little bit with the hierarchy, isn't he? Because he's saying, I'm not good enough at the moment. I can't do this job. It's very hard for me. Blah, blah, blah.
Who would have thought a sporting event's halftime show could have a bigger impact than the game itself? Well, the Super Bowl halftime show does exactly that. In 2024, Usher brought in an audience of 180 million worldwide, the biggest ever in the event's history. But how did singing and dancing get to be the centrepiece of America's biggest sporting event? The first edition of the Super Bowl was held in 1967 when the Green Bay Packers beat the Kansas City Chiefs in Los Angeles. Because of the sheer size of the event, organisers wanted to put on entertainment at halftime for the fans in the stadium. It was a display of marching bands, dancers and pure USA patriotism, and that was the theme that followed for years. In the 1980s, the Walt Disney Company got involved and we started seeing some interesting and questionable displays. But we got our first glimpse of halftime shows to come in '93 when none other than Michael Jackson stunned fans with his 15-minute medley of his own smash hits. When he walked out on stage, he had to wait for the crowd's cheers to die down for about 2 minutes before even starting his first song. Diana Ross, Gloria Estefan, Phil Collins all starred in their own shows, as did Aerosmith, who performed alongside NSYNC. Things got a little bit out of hand in 2004 when Justin Timberlake and Janet Jackson produced perhaps the most famous or infamous wardrobe malfunction in history. Shows from the likes of Prince, Lady Gaga and Beyoncé are considered by critics as the best. To give you an idea of the scale of things, Rihanna's 2023 halftime show included roughly 800 people. These ranged from backing dancers to stage crew to camera operatives broadcasting to millions around the world. The whole stage for that show was built in roughly 8 minutes and was broken down and cleared away in the same time. The acts perform for free nowadays, even though the experts reckon it costs around $13 million to put on Rihanna's show. Artists know they'll rocket up the charts in the following weeks. Rihanna's average sales improved by 140% in the months following her performance. The Super Bowl halftime show will be a fixture in pop culture for years to come. So the question is, who next?
Welcome back, everybody, to tonight's edition, the third and the final hour, sad to say, of Trans Europe Express. I'm Danny Kelly. With me, as always, is Andy Brassell. Lots to get through in this final 60 minutes, previewing some of the bigger games in the Europa League and the Europa Conference League, including the emergence of a rival for Crystal Palace in that Conference League. We've got a cult hero for you in about 10 minutes' time. And we'll be taking Andy will take you around the leagues. As well as that, we'll be going to South America and joining our colleague and friend Tim Vickery. Don't need me to tell you anymore. It's going to be fantastic. Thank you for being with us. We know you could be doing something better on a Sunday night. We really do understand that. So we're delighted when you're here with us on Trans Europe Express. Yeah, this is the time of the evening where every night we'll be talking to our friend Tim Vickery, and he joins us now from South America. Hello, Tim.
Hello, very good evening, gentlemen. How are you doing?
We're very, very good. Thank you very much indeed. And Tim, I don't know whether it's in your topics or not because I'm still awaiting them, but Andy wanted to talk to you about the Brazilian reaction to what went on involving Vinicius Junior in the Champions League this week, where once again he is alleged to have been racially abused, the game was stopped and all the rest of it. Because this is a regular thing with Vinicius Junior, and we've sometimes seen Brazilian players across the globe coming out in support of him.
Yeah, well, there's a European angle to this story that we saw in the terraces there in Lisbon in midweek, and we've seen in the terraces all around Spain. But there's also very much a South American angle to this story because the rival player accused, and I would have thought the fact that he said all this behind a lifted up shirt would be in some way a confession of guilt. Prestiani is Argentine, and this Argentine versus Brazil racism row goes on and on and on. Every time a Brazilian team goes to Argentina to play in one of the continental competitions, almost invariably they come out the monkey chants and so on. All the time. In fact, it's not just football. We had a case here in Rio recently of an Argentine lawyer on holiday in Brazil who got in a row, I think, with a waiter and was caught making that monkey gesture to the waiter and ended up in prison as a consequence. Now, the problem is that Argentina doesn't seem to think it's a problem. It's very, very disappointing. And Argentina will come back. I just saw Sergio Aguero say this. He said, Rodrigo and Vinicius, they're always provoking. They say things on the field. Yes, that again, yes. And another thing that the Argentines, they come up with all the time is when our teams visit Brazil, we're always attacked by the police or by visiting fans. Now, there's a great deal of truth in this.
But it ain't
two
the
wrongs
same
don't
thing.
make
a right.
Exactly, it reminds me so much of arguments that I was having with people in England more than 40 years ago now. And Argentina, it will not move on from this. It won't. When some people maybe have moved on, but many haven't. And what I think is, there are two things that I think are extremely depressing here. One is that they should be being taught, perhaps, by their own players who have top-class European experience, who have experience of multinational, multicultural dressing rooms. I mean, it's hard to find black Argentines. They do exist, and if you go back 200 years, Buenos Aires was a third black. In fact, tango, which is Argentina's biggest cultural export musical style, is an African word. But over time, they don't exist really much anymore as an identifiable group, Afro-descendant Argentines. There are some there, but a lot of it's been kind of swallowed into the gene pool.
Yeah.
So it's not something that many of them have the habit of knowing Afro-descendants and so on. So I think it's very, very depressing that they're not being educated by their own players. We saw quite the reverse of this, Enzo Fernandez and co, after winning the Copa America, singing that song. The other depressing thing is that now it's become a thing. Now, even Argentina, they are aware that they really shouldn't be doing this. Some of them are doing it no longer for ignorance, but now out of real stupidity and wicked stubbornness. That's who we are. We'll do what we like,
So, Tim, how much of that is affected by the political climate in Argentina at the moment?
I would say less than you would probably think. There's a very right-wing government there in Argentina that they're trying to bring in a 12-hour working day. One of the things that allowed the flourishing of football all over the world was the 8-hour working day, and Argentina are trying to turn the clock back on that. But no, it goes deeper than just who the governments are at the moment. And it's a big part of the Argentine football mentality that what goes on the field stays on the field, and is forgotten. So I mean, I don't know where the necessary education is going to come from, because it is badly needed. So this is a story that happened in Europe, with a very strong European dimension, but also with a very strong South American dimension.
I guess my other part of the question about that, Tim, is what next for Gianluca Prestiani? I know he shouldn't be the main figure in this, because he's not owned up to what he's done for a start, which is not great. But I can't help feeling that what Benfica feel is support for him is actually really terrible advice that's going to stand him not in good stead in his career as a young player who wants to progress, who wants to establish himself in Europe, who wants to do better. Whereas it feels like Enzo Fernandez, in a different environment, perhaps encouraged by that environment, was sort of forced into contrition in a way, and forced to look within himself. And he's got past it by, obviously, I'm sure he's got teammates who feel he shouldn't have been forgiven for that. And I think that's completely fair enough. But he has appeared genuinely contrite afterwards, whereas Prestiani has not been forced to face what he's done.
No, the difference is that one incident happened on the football field and is subject to greater penalties than an incident that happened in the team coach. But I agree 100%. I think the best thing for Prestiani to do would be to hold his hands up and accept that punishment is part of education. I think in the long term it would do him so much better, and it is extremely disappointing that Jose Mourinho is not giving him that advice. Instead, Jose Mourinho is moaning about provocation. The man who was provoked as a profession.
Yeah. Tim, listen, thank you for giving us an update on the angle there. And it's really interesting, this thing about Argentina. You can see it in the tackling of Argentinian players, of Brazilian players in particular. But that's a different thing. That's Christian Romero's thing. The racism, if it's predictable, we've got to work even harder to put a stop to it. Talk to me about Philippe Coutinho, one of the very high-profile players who's returned to Brazil as the money has started to wash through the Brazilian league, but he's walked out on Vasco da Gama.
He has, yeah, which is where it all started for him. And when he went back to Vasco, I think there was just a little gleam in his eye that maybe he could get back in contention for the national team for one last start at the World Cup. I don't think that was ever likely. I think you saw his decline in the Premier League when he came back to Aston Villa. Even with Steve Gerrard there, to help him out, he really wasn't the same player. I actually think his decision to go to Barcelona was, both from him and Barcelona, one of the biggest transfer clangers you could possibly imagine. Anyway, it hasn't worked out really for him, in part because Vasco is one of the 4 big Rio teams. The other 3 are the last 3 teams to win South America's Champions League. So, Vasco are having to watch their neighbours do a lot of celebrating. They're doing none. The end of last year, the Brazil season ended last year with the cup final. The cup final was a big deal. Big deal. There's more money on offer for winning the cup than there is for winning the league. And Vasco lost that. And in the culture of Brazilian football, it is worse to lose a final than it is to go out in the early rounds. It's seen as a kind of greater humiliation. So the fans have been getting on his back. And Coutinho walked out. He's a very introverted character, I think, a very, very shy character. And what has done it for him is not only the pressure from the stands, but pressure from social media influences. These are big in Brazil. Social media influences around the clubs. It's kind of revolutionised journalism in Brazil. All of these YouTube sites and so on. There's been as the most important player, as the big star number 10. A lot of the pressure has been on him, and he and the team hasn't been delivering. And he's just sick and tired of the abuse that he's been taking. So he walked out. You can understand now, I think, why Crystal Palace made such a blunder, loaning Mateus França to Vasco da Gama. The Brazilian they bought has never really hit the ground running. I think it was way premature myself. Attacking midfielder, because Matheus França came up with Flamengo, who are Vasco's biggest rivals, and Palace bought him from Flamengo. Now, if the Vasco fans are so cruel that they drive one of their own, Philippe Coutinho, out of the team, imagine what they've been doing to Matheus França, who can't get a game, whose confidence is absolutely shot to bits, and every time he takes the field, there's just this chorus of boos. There is money in Brazilian football, there are opportunities in Brazilian football, but it's not an easy place to earn your money.
Tim, I wanted to ask about Martah turning 40, and I mean, of all the footballers I've interviewed, she's up there amongst the 2 or 3 most interesting. An incredible story, a fascinating character. Tell us what she's done for Brazilian women's football.
Well, I think it goes further than that. It's what she's done for women's football, full stop. To my mind, she's the most important player in the history of the game. And in the same way as Pelé, it's utterly transformational. And you can't imagine the World Cup being this thing every 4 years in TV sets all around the world without Pelé. I think Martah has legitimised women's football in places where without her it would have had a much, much harder time becoming legitimised. And it is an incredible backstory, from remote north of Brazil, having real problems with her own brothers when she started playing football, having a mother who is illiterate, and from it's the great meritocratic force of football, isn't it? From those unpromising beginnings, becoming, I think, the most important player in the history of the women's game, and still going. She was absolutely vital to Brazil winning the Copa America. She snatched victory from the jaws of defeat against Colombia last year. And next year, just over 12 months' time, 15 months' time, Brazil are hosting the next version of the Women's World Cup. And I very, very much think that she's going to be around. She won't play every minute of every game, but I think she'll still be there. And wouldn't it be a fabulous story if she could win the competition for the first time after more than some 25 years of trying? So it's an important date, her at 40. But it doesn't mean that the story is finished. There are future chapters to be written.
Listen, Tim, one last quick one, very quickly, actually. We're running out of time. Jesse Lingard linked with a move to Brazil.
Yes, Remo in the north of Brazil. It's not, just as with Philippe Coutinho, not an easy place to earn your money, this one. 2 reasons. Number one, they're newly up and expected to go down. It's going to be a long, hard battle against relegation. And also, look at the map. They're in Belém, north of Brazil. There was once a Brazilian player who said, who touched down there and said, "I'm honoured to be playing in the city where Christ was born," because Belém is the Portuguese translation of Bethlehem, and a little bit of history had to be explained to him. It's not quite like that, but if you look at the map, you will see that pretty much every away game is a 3 or 4 hour flight. So that's a hard life, and my interpretation, I don't know, is that because these negotiations have apparently been going on for a while, but I would be doing this if I were Jesse Lingard, just waiting to see if someone else will come in, another Brazilian club maybe, because Remo, lovely club, lovely region of the world, but it's a tough ask. A lot of time fighting off relegation, and a lot of time spent on aeroplanes traversing a country the size of a continent.
Listen, thank you very, very much indeed, Tim. Thank you so much, as always. The big stories and the exciting ones, and the ones that we sometimes miss, Tim brings them to you every single Sunday here on Trans Europe Expressway. Next, we've got a fun cult hero for you.
Mourinho, one of the best managers of our generation. But I'll tell you what, he's lost a lot of fans. He's lost a lot of neutral fans. And I just felt his comments were disgusting. For one, Vinicius Jr., if he wants to run to the corner flag and do a dance that a lot of Brazilian players do, Cunha danced when he scored against Arsenal, didn't receive racial abuse from anybody, any player. So Vinicius Jr. is allowed to dance. And also, Eusebio is one of our best ever players. This club cannot be racist. What does that mean? Because your best ever player was black. That means no one else can be racist to do with your football club. And also, no one says Benfica was a racist football club, did they? It was alleged that a player had been racist. So why is Mourinho protecting the football club?
Trip to Cheltenham, Alan Brazil style on talkSPORT.
Yeah, fancy joining talkSPORT at the famous Cheltenham Festival for Gold Cup Day? Well, we're giving away the ultimate hospitality experience for two on Friday, March the 13th. Now, you'll get the full day of VIP treatment, a 4-course lunch, complimentary bar all day, celebrity tipsters and much, much more. You'll be experiencing the races in the best possible way and you'll get to meet some of us. So here's how to enter. For your chance to win, text WIN, W-I-N, to 83338. And your text will cost £2.50 plus your standard network rate. Or you can call 0343 418 7260. The lines close on the 27th of February at 4 p.m. That's when you'll need to answer your phone if it rings. It's 18 plus and UK residents only. This is a talkSPORT promotion. Full T's and C's are at talksport.com. So for your chance to win, text WIN, W-I-N, to 83338. Do it now and the best of luck to each one of you. Okay, time now for a resuscitation of a feature that we love on this programme. Time for this.
Incredible Zlatan Ibrahimovic.
Ronaldo! That's magnificent!
Dennis Bergkamp! Dennis Bergkamp! Dennis Bergkamp!
Yes, older listeners, more regular listeners back in the day, we know we used to do, lovely pieces about cult heroes from the history of the game. We have decided for 1 week only to update it to somebody who's still playing the game, although as he approaches in a very short while his 40th birthday, perhaps you might have thought he's already retired. But what he's doing at a certain level of football in one of the big football countries of the world means that he's far from retired and still very much an influential figure. I'm talking about tonight's cult hero, Andy, who is Edin Dzeko. Now, he does, as I say, he turns 40 in the spring, but tell us why we suddenly decided we were going to do this, because he is suddenly a very important player in one of the big stories in European football.
Yeah, in one of the big clubs in European football, even if he's not playing in the top division anymore. He decided to take a step down and wasn't getting a game at Fiorentina, having signed at the start of the season. So understandably, at 39, no time to waste. He's going to be 40 on St. Patrick's Day. And I will leave it with you to raise a pint of Guinness to him on that day. But
you know I will.
I think you will. And he wanted to play, and so he's gone off to join Schalke. Now, Schalke is still, in terms of bums on seats, as we say, one of the biggest clubs in the world. Over 60,000 every home game, despite the fact they are in the second tier in Germany now. So that would have been a big draw. It was interesting this weekend. Permin Stregler, former player who's now the sporting director of Wolfsburg, confirmed the rumour as fact that Wolfsburg tried to get him back. Of course, he won the title there in 2009 in that brilliant front two with Grafica, Zvezdan Misimovic, setting them up with so many great passes as well, an incredible sort of front 2.5. And Dzeko was already a long way down the line negotiating with Schalke, and he felt he owed it to follow that through, and perhaps he feared maybe sullying his perfect reputation from before, because he wouldn't be winning again with Wolfsburg, that's for sure. But there's something really to be done with Schalke this season, because they've done really, really well this season under new management, as we know. And they needed something else. They felt to see them over the line. Now, they've been wobbling a little bit since Dzeko arrived. But the numbers on paper, there's really little argument. 3 starts, 4 goals, 3 assists already, including a goal and an assist in the 5-3 win over Magdeburg yesterday. Second straight win that's put them back on top of the table, and they're in a good position all over again. And when Dzeko went there, when you think of his illustrious career, Danny, and what admirers we've been of his for the last decade plus, you know, probably going back to that Wolfsburg team, which is like over 15 years ago now, it's the fact that you thought when he arrived, he's probably going to be the best player in that division by a mile. And you sort of thought that in a sort of throwaway sense to yourself. But he is. He's miles better than everyone else in the division. He's still so good.
Let me just make a point here, Andy, as well, just for people who are, you know, Edin, it is an amazing feat of longevity, but it's not like he's not doing it. As you say, he's doing very well there. And I just remembered that in June of last year, he scored the only goal for Bosnia-Herzegovina in the World Cup qualifier against San Marino, becoming the oldest player ever to score in a FIFA World Cup qualification game, beating the record, I'll get his name right here, of Marc Pujol of Andorra. But he was 39 years of age when he did that. And all of this, Andy, we know the great clubs that Edin Dzeko has played for: Roma, Inter, Manchester City, Fiorentina, and now Schalke. All of this having had to spend his childhood in the hideous turmoil of the civil wars in former Yugoslavia. Yeah, that's right. He had to pick his moments to play football. Sometimes he was kicking a ball about in a bunker. It's a remarkable story. His family home was destroyed by a missile. Yeah, and bear in mind that he wasn't considered a prodigy either. He had to battle his way up through Bosnian football, through Czech football, before finally ending up and sort of making it a Wolfsburg, which was already an incredible victory for him. And then you think of the 2009 title. I think sometimes it's forgotten his role in Manchester City's first Premier League title. The fact without that equaliser in the 90th minute, the Aguero moment doesn't happen as well. So even though he wasn't always a starter for Manchester City, you could say that about a lot of great players down the years, such as has been their resource in the Abu Dhabi era. And yeah, he's gone on to, remember, be the first player to score 50 Premier League goals, 50 Bundesliga goals, 50 Serie A goals, and his career has carried on and on and on from there. An enviable list of trophies. Now, he still scored 14 in the Super League for Fenerbahce last season, as they came very close to winning the title and got a fair way in Europe as well. So, you know, I think there are very few players who are able to choose their exit. But he's going to be one of those, basically, isn't he? Because he's so good. So I guess the only question is, I'm sure he can get Schalke to promotion, and probably the championship as well. And, you know, we have to say Miro Muzlic has done a really great job there this season since going from Plymouth, despite the little wobble of late. The question is, does he play in the Bundesliga again? Well, that would be amazing. It would be 15 years after he left the Bundesliga to be a star in about 5 other leagues if he returned and played some part in Schalke's return to the Bundesliga. And as I always say, if you want to know how big Schalke are and how weird it is that they're in the second tier of English football, their home games are still attracting 60,000+ supporters. Imagine being a team with a stadium that holds 60,000 and being in the second tier of any football league, he said, looking at the top of the Seven Sisters Road. Thank you for that, Andy. That's our cult hero, Edin Dzeko. Next, we'll look at the Europa League and the Europa Conference League.
Incredible Zlatan Ibrahimovic!
There were reports that the night that Sean Dyche was sacked after that Wolves game, 4 or 5 senior players were called into Marinakis' boardroom, and they essentially said, "We're not loving this." And I don't like that. That feels unfair to someone like Sean Dyche. However, last night I think was great evidence because the players played with the reins off. They played with freedom, and I think it shows that how maybe unhappy some of those players were under Sean Dyche. The fact that they went to Istanbul, to a team unbeaten domestically under Dominic Tedesco, and absolutely played them off the park.
Yeah, on paper, Max, you look at your team. I mean,
I know, yeah.
Hudson-Odoi on the wide, on his
Gibbs-White.
day, he can do it. Hutchinson, you've got Gibbs-White, as you mentioned there. You've got Elliot Anderson in midfield as well. So you've got some top players.
I think he's the key, Elliot Anderson, because he's the dynamo, he's the driving force. And if he can win and keep them playing, and
Yeah, we talked earlier on in the show about the Champions League games on Tuesday and Wednesday. Those are to qualify for the last 16. The last 16 round is already in full swing in both the Europa League and the Conference League, Andy. And some big games already played last Thursday, and the second legs, very interesting again. Let's talk about some of these games in the Europa League, particularly those involving English and Scottish clubs. If Galatasaray's thrashing of Juventus was the amazing result in the Champions League from Turkey during the week, then the reverse could be said of Nottingham Forest going to Fenerbahce themselves. No sort of shortcomings in terms of spending cash on footballers and wages, but Forest beat them 3-0. It was an incredible result.
Yeah, and you know what? It would be doing it a great disservice to say it was a great away performance, even though it was. Because great away performance implies you defended well and played smartly, which is all true, but it implies as well that the other team were being kept at bay, whereas that wasn't the case at all. Forest was so much better than Fenerbahce. They were fantastic. 3-0 was the least they deserved, I thought. Great first impression from Vitor Pereira. And of course, he's had some great times rowing with the fans at Fenerbahce in his 2 spells there. So I'm sure there are a few words from the bench behind him while it was all going on. But look, that they were great. And you do feel with the squad they've got, I think their domestic problems have overshadowed that they're a genuine contender for this competition. And this was a little reminder of that. Now, some of the results And some of the moments that they've let slip by in this competition have overshadowed the fact that when they have been good in it, they've been very, very good. So, 2 managers ago, I think it was when Ange Postecoglou was still in charge, and they went to Betis. They played really well. They should have won that game, and they didn't. And who knows? Maybe that would have changed things in the short term for Ange Postecoglou. They were brilliant at home against Porto, and really they're a couple of Morgan Gibbs White missed penalties away from not having to participate in this in the first place. But in terms of getting the Pereira reign off to the right sort of start and sort of saying to them, there's plenty left in the rest of this season, I think it would have been very easy with Premier League survival at stake for Vitor Pereira to say, let's just stick out the reserves at this game. And in fact, it was more success begets success, wasn't it? And they played so well and can really take something from this, because Fenerbahce have been incredibly consistent this season, and I've not seen them been given a hiding like this all season.
No, great credits to Nottingham Forest. I guess the only question is whether they will be distracted from, the late goal they conceded against Liverpool at the City Ground this afternoon means that they are still bang in the middle of the relegation scrap. And they can probably put out a mix and match team for this second leg, but as the competition continues, it'll be interesting to see where their priorities lie. Another game that I think we need to discuss was the game between Celtic and Stuttgart in Glasgow. Stuttgart won 4-1, and afterwards there was an outpouring on the social media that I saw, certainly, of Celtic fans fed up with the result, appalled with the board. It was protests against the board in the very first minutes of the game. But regardless of the match itself, Andy, with all due respect, and I love Scottish football, the top 4 or 5 teams in Germany are always going to beat teams in Scotland at this present moment. Look at the players Stuttgart have got.
Yeah, I think you have to look at that. You have to look at the squad they've got, not just the 11 they've got, but the squad they've got. The fact that they've got an absolute titan of a coach in Sebastian Hoeneß, who I think we can say 95% of clubs in Europe would want. He's that good. And it felt a little bit like Stuttgart were toying with them, which must have been hard to accept for Celtic, and especially having made a leap in the Champions League last season and been competitive in the Champions League for the first time in a while. It must be hard to accept. The reality is, and I guess this is the point where Celtic fans have a point and Rangers fans had a point when they were complaining about their European mishaps as well, is just the quality gap is so big. I think that is the thing, and you can talk about funding, but clearly money's not always been well spent. I think it's fair to say certain parts of the team have been left to decay. But with things being as they are, you can't expect any more. Stuttgart was always a super tough draw, and Celtic were never going to win this tie. But I think it's really interesting. We talked about the bracket earlier, Danny. So this is where we are going into the next round, in that we've got Forest will be playing either Betis or Midtjylland, who they've played already at the City Ground, of course, a game that they lost under Ange Postecoglou. Stuttgart, I think, again, we can feel pretty safe saying they're going through. They will play either Braga or Porto, one of the Portuguese teams. And the interesting one as well for Aston Villa, who will be playing either the winner of PAOK versus Celta, which Celta won the away leg, so the strong favourites going forward, or the winner between Lille and Crvena Zvezda, Red Star Belgrade, of course, former winner of the European Cup.
Well, I want to talk about that game between Lille and Red Star because, I'm of a vintage where I was really interested in, while I was not interested in communism, I was very interested in the football behind the old Berlin Wall and all the rest of it. And East Europe, because the players didn't travel to play in Western Europe because of the regimes they lived under, was that they had loads of technically brilliant teams and, of course, fantastic coaches. And among them was that Red Star side, that amazing Red Star side that won the Champions League. Well, of course, with the coming of the free market to that part of the world, a lot of these great clubs have withered somewhat. So it was amazing to see Red Star, and you'll have to help me with their current pronunciation, Andy, beating Lille from the much more powerful French league by a goal to nil, although Lille, of course, are having their problems this year.
Yeah, they are. They're having a bit of a dip at the moment. And Olivier Letang, the president, had to come out and back Bruno Genesio. He's a terrific coach, but they are having a bad spell at the moment. After the game, Letang came out and stood up for him. Bear in mind that Lille, talking of doing well in the Champions League last season, they beat Real Madrid, they beat Atletico Madrid, they drew with Juventus in the league stage last season. So again, a little bit of a drop off for them, though they did win today at Angers with an Olivier Giroud penalty. Once you've lost the home leg against Crvena Zvezda, like going to the Maracanã is a tall order, isn't it? Really, it's really tough, and they've had some really good results at home in Europe over the last couple of seasons. Interestingly as well, they're being coached by Dejan Stankovic. Of course, he's got a couple of sons doing very well in the game at the moment. I suspect the younger one might end up in the Premier League before long. Of course, he's at Club Brugge at the moment, Alex. So it'd be interesting to see what they're able to do going forward. I mean, looking at the bracket, as we say, they could well end up playing against Aston Villa in the last 16.
And Andy, in the conference, because English teams have done so well, as you would blinking well hope they would, in the third tier of European competition, we have assumed that Crystal Palace, despite all their problems, would remain favourites for the tournament right through to the end. I put it to you that there may be a dark horse coming up on the rails for Palace here now, and it is a dark horse that we're very familiar with in European competition. Fiorentina have had an appalling start to the season, but they've done something about it. They've brought in Fabio Paratici from Tottenham to run the club. They brought in 5 first-team players in the January transfer window. They are suddenly escaping from the relegation problems in Italy, and they won 3-0 in Bialystok in their conference game. Could they be the ones to stop Crystal Palace?
Yeah, well, maybe. Jagiellonia Białystok have done really well. Top of the Polish league, of course, still played a game less as well. So they're one of the teams, and I guess they're the sort of team who have really drawn benefit out of the creation of the Conference League. I mean, it's interesting. Go back a month and a half, and Poland were in second place behind England in terms of getting the extra Champions League place. That's no longer the case. Of course, Germany in the box seat as stands to get that 5th Champions League place along with the Premier League. But yeah, it's a great win for Fiorentina. And again, they left a few big players out because they're not clear of relegation at all. Like we said, if they win against Pisa tomorrow night, they might get themselves away. But if they can get the results, and the results have been steadily improving domestically over the next little while, then they've got the chance to have a proper crack at this. And, it's an itch that needs scratching. The 2 finals and a semi-final in the last 3 years, they're going to feel it's their competition. And I think because of Chelsea last season, and following on from West Ham as well, I think so soon after West Ham, I think it's easy to look at it and think the English club's just going to win it every time. And even the season where Olympiacos won it, there was a feeling that's because Aston Villa kind of dropped the ball in the Villa Park leg of the semi-final against Olympiacos. So I think we have to be realistic and say that the Premier League's power does give it a massive advantage. But Palace are a bit of an outlier. They're not Chelsea, are they? No. Not only are things a little bit unhappy, as we saw at Zrinski and the away leg and the chance against Oliver Glasner and how difficult a situation it is for all involved at the moment. But what has been clear with Palace being in Europe all season is, it's their first season in Europe. And that lack of experience, that lack of knowing really how to manage games in some occasions, and the fact that they're expected to attack teams in a way that's not always the case in the Premier League. It's actually really difficult for them, and it's a lot more difficult than it has been for other teams in the recent past. So I'm looking at Fiorentina to an extent, but I'm looking at Strasbourg, who are great tonight, as we said, and doing very well under Gary O'Neill. I'm looking at Shakhtar, who've had that nice winter break, which I think, especially in the busy calendar, is really going to help them. And I think if we look into the next round, if Crystal Palace do get through, which they're still favourites to do, they get AEK Larnaca or Mainz, who've been really improving under Urs Fischer in the Bundesliga, pulling away from the bottom of the table. And then after that, there are easier ties, I think you can say, for Shakhtar. The big one in the last 16, though, was possible. Fiorentina will be playing either Rakov from Poland or they'll be playing Strasbourg. So imagine Strasbourg, Fiorentina in the last 16. If we're talking of something that could give an advantage for Palace, I mean, one of the favourites knocking one of the other favourites out in the last 16 would be a massive boost, wouldn't it?
They would. And Andy, of course, my own club, Tottenham, are in such a dark place that supporters like me, I can't help thinking, imagine Glasner leaves Crystal Palace, Thomas Frank will take over and win the Conference League, won't he? Sorry, the football gods have already got their boot on my throat. They don't need to press any harder, do they?
And this is with Vitor Pereira lifting the Europa League, I'm presuming.
Well, we'll see. Yeah, absolutely. It's very possible, of course.
Could happen.
When we come back, Andy will take you around the rest of the league, starting in the Netherlands, and I'll tell you on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we've got multiple commentaries for you in Europe and domestically. I'll tell you what you can hear right here on your home of live football, talkSPORT.
I'll tell you why I'm not worried. Because if Arteta doesn't win anything this season, major, then it has to go. All right?
No, I disagree with that.
No, well, you would, wouldn't you? But we don't sack managers every other week.
But you can't sack a manager who gets to the latter stages of every competition. You can't. You can't.
When the pattern emerges.
You can sack them.
The pattern emerges. Chelsea did it.
It depends what they do.
They won things.
So, John,
okay, here's a question. Would you sack Arteta if they finish second in
well, what happens in the Champions League?
They lose in the final.
What happens in the Carabao Cup?
Lose in the final.
FA Cup?
Lose in the final.
Mate, he's got to go. You can't.
You're gonna sack him.
You can't get to three
finals.
You can't get to three finals and finish second. You can't. That to me tells that is all the evidence. No, you well done. It's a little bit like what Claudio Ranieri done at Chelsea. Chelsea he finished second that season. We beat Arsenal in the semi-final, quarter-final of the Champions League. Got beat by
just a few minutes now for Andy to take you around the other European leagues we haven't touched on tonight so far. But let me first of all tell you about the commentaries we've got for you. Live football here on the talkSPORT network Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. Well, Wednesday we've got in the Championship over on talkSPORT 2, the big game between Sheffield United and Coventry. Then here on talkSPORT, Real Madrid against Benfica. That hugely controversial game will be an 8 o'clock kickoff here on talkSPORT. Then on Thursday, we've got two games from Europe for you. The quarter-to-6 kickoff over in Germany between Stuttgart and Celtic. That's the Europa League playoff second leg. Ian Danta and former Scotland striker Chris Owellamo would bring you that one. And then at 8 o'clock, also over on talkSPORT 2, Crystal Palace against Zrinski. Mostar in the conference playoff. That'll be Alex Crook and the former Crystal Palace midfielder Darren Ambrose will bring you that one. While over here on talkSPORT on Thursday, the 8 o'clock kickoff between Nottingham Forest and Fenerbahce. Natalie Sawyer will bring you that game, and the commentary will come from Joe Shannon and former England women's striker Leanne Sanderson. So that's 5 games for you on Wednesday and Thursday here on talkSPORT. And before we go around the rest of the leagues, I need to apologise to the supporters of Larne. A few weeks ago, when you were off for perfectly good reasons, I announced that Larne were winning their 3rd title in 4 years in the Northern Ireland Premiership. They were running away with it. They're a very powerful team these days and have broken the monopoly of the other bigger sides in that part of the island on which I live. Well, since then, things have not gone well for them at all. And as we stand right now, they're only 2 points ahead of Coleraine, albeit with the game in hand as we head into the final stages of the season. I may have been a little bit premature in hoisting the trophy above the heads of Larne Football Club, and I apologise to their fans if I went too early there. Andy, let's go around the rest of the European leagues, and you want to start, I think, in the Netherlands.
Yeah, I mean, the question is when you're going to do to Arsenal what you've done to Larne.
Well, certainly not this afternoon, that's for sure.
No. I guess moving on, a slight Arsenal connect because that's where we really last saw him. We should underline in the Netherlands, it was the debut of Raheem Sterling for Feyenoord today. He came on for the last half hour of the game against Telstar, where they'd come from a goal down to lead. Anis Hadj Musa scoring a couple of the goals, the guy who will be playing on the opposite side to him. So when Sterling came on, he played on the left-hand side. Now, I wonder if it feels like Robin van Persie really has a plan for him, because he played Jordan Boss, the Australian player who's pretty fast, on the left-hand side from the start to sort of, I guess, soften up the defence. Boss was really good in the first half in particular. Then Sterling came on, looked evidently a little bit off the pace, as you would expect at this point. Yes. And Feyenoord ended up really sort of hanging on towards the end of the game to get the 2-1 win over the team with the lowest budget in the league over the line. But, you know, Feyenoord have had a rough couple of months, and Sterling in the medium term is hoping to be part of them turning that around. But it was all about the result, really, this weekend. Firstly, them getting the win, because with Ajax and Nek Nijmegen drawing yesterday, and by the way, if you wanted a reminder of how far Ajax have fallen, they've only lost 3 games all season, but the draws are killing them at the moment. Yeah. And Nek played much better than them, I thought, for large parts of the game. And really, a team like that, or a club like that, coming to Ajax and really laying down the law is a reminder that something has gone quite badly wrong there. So really, with those two sort of taking each other out of the picture, because Nek are 3rd and Ajax are 4th, it means there's a 5-point cushion for Feyenoord in 2nd place, which is synonymous with the other automatic Champions League place. So big thing for them. Big thing for Robin van Persie to relieve a little bit of that pressure. And he'll be hoping in the last month and a half or so of the season to have got Raheem Sterling to the sort of point where he can be the decisive player. He can get them over the line. If we're thinking about a month down the line, Feyenoord are playing Ajax. If he can get Sterling in good nick for that, I mean, that could be one of the decisive games of the season for both Feyenoord and Ajax. Look, Sterling showed loads of willing. You know, he's gone out there when he could easily be sat on his sofa. People are waiting for him to fail. But actually, there's a great deal of excitement in the Netherlands, and particularly in Rotterdam, of course, that he's back out there. So let's hope we see him somewhere near his best in the near future.
As you rightly say, he could sit on his sofa earning a huge packet of money. He's gone there and risked his reputation. Good luck to him. Of course, good luck to him. What about the football in Turkey, Andy?
Well, a really interesting weekend there, because after all the flowers from the week? Well, the flowers have started to go off a little bit already, and the water's looking cloudy because Galatasaray, with maybe half an eye on that game against Juventus, and maybe the fact that they really exerted themselves in that, few team changes, but should have been able to go to struggling Konyaspor and win. It was the sort of game that 65 minutes in, you thought, OK, they're going to get a scratchy 1-0 win out of this. They went down 2-0 in the end, letting a couple of goals in the last 20 minutes. And what this all means is Fenerbahce can go level on points at the top if they beat Kazim Pasha at home tomorrow night, which you would expect them to do. Still unbeaten in the league, of course, Fenerbahce. And, with a little bit of extra space because they've not been playing in these midweeks as well. And an enviable squad, though they do have an injury to Milan Skriniar to deal with going forward into the last bit of the season. But what's really notable is the fact that every time Victor Osimhen gets a rest, has a massive effect on Galatasaray. Now, we know what a brilliant finisher Mauro Icardi is. He doesn't press in quite the same way, does he? Very, very different strikers. And he leaves a huge hole when he's not there, Osimhen.
Yeah, physically and tactically, absolutely right.
Yeah.
And finally, Andy, 45 seconds or a minute on Portugal.
Yeah, well, look, I could tell you that Porto are still 4 points clear at top, who are in from Sporting, who in turn are a further 3 points in front of Benfica. But we touched on that earlier. So let's talk about the big derby between Braga and Guimarães. Ended up 3-2 to Braga. Of course, Vitória Guimarães, their deadly rivals, beat them in the Taça da Liga, the League Cup final. Rodrigo Salazar missed a penalty in the last minute of that, which saw Guimarães over the line. He scored twice in this one, so ultimate redemption for him.
So, Andy, that takes us towards the end of tonight's programme. As always, in these weeks when there is absolute blizzards of European football, I have to ask you what your busy and varied itinerary takes in. Where are you going this week, Andy?
So I'll be in Paris on Wednesday, and we'll see if I'm going to the PSG Monaco game. And I think I'll be at Forest Fenerbahce on Thursday as well. So be interesting to see what sort of team Fenerbahce put out, as well as Forest, because both got their eyes on bigger things, both of those teams, and the wind blowing in one direction.
We could see two teams of teenagers playing against each other in an important European tie. Listen, thank you very, very much, Andy, for the last 3 hours. Thank you all for listening. Let me tell you, in our poll, 38% of you think that Arsenal will go furthest of the English teams in the Champions League. Thank you very much for voting in that. Coming up next here on talkSPORT, it's how to win the World Cup. It only remains for me to say thank you for listening. Good night and God bless you all.
Just unbelievable how things have changed so dramatically just from like a 190-minute game where Arsenal
No,
really...
but it's not 190-minute game, though.
No, it's not.
It's been a few weeks now.
No, you're right. But if Arsenal win that 2-0 compared to drawing it 2-2, the narrative is so different. The point, it's so... We're talking about now, you said it last night, championship rounds. We are there. We're approaching that time now.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the funny thing, right, is that it's... Man City, right? They're not putting Arsenal under pressure. This is not like Man City and Liverpool going toe